Pod. Pod. Yeah, it's just like begin with a bit of a chat, Luke. Really, like you're just saying you work in mental health now.
Well, I mean, I started in the music industry as like a drug addict, like alcoholic. I come from like a long family of jazz heads, hippies, West Coast. I mean, my mom's from Bristol, and my mom's a suicide, and my grandmother is a suicide. And she was like a piano player. She used to play for American servicemen and bars, and she made more money than my grandfather, who had a fish and chip shop in Bristol. And then they didn't pay taxes, so I had to move to Swansea. So my mom grew up in Swansea. But yeah, both of them were suicides. There's like professional drug dealers in my family. I come from like a long line of deep hipsters, with severe mental problems, but also like not really much than any other family or music industry stuff. I mean, when I got into the music industry, I was really unimpressed by like partying and stuff, because I was just like, oh, this is just like Christmas at my house, like, like when I was 10 years old, I remember being at my grandfather's house and like my aunt like nodding off into the mashed potatoes. And that was the first time I heard the word heroin, so I was like, what's heroin? Like, I don't know, and then there's just like, I grew up with my dad sitting in my dad's lap, and he'd be like smoking weed, and I'd be like eating the pot seeds and like scratching his beard and stuff. So that was kind of like my family MO. I was more of a drinker, but yeah, I mean, I kind of fell into, I just was really like kind of depressed and anxious for a long time. And then to keep my marriage together, I started going to therapy. And then like I got sober 12 years ago because my wife was basically just like, this sucks, like I don't like watching you do this anymore. And then I was like, whatever, babe, I'm a rock and roll. I'm a rock and roll dude. Like, this is what rock and roll guys do. And she's like, yeah, no, that's kind of just like, it sucks watching you. And it's like, all right. So I got some new friends, and I got really into studying mental health in the same way that I did, because that's really what I was looking for in music. Was I was looking for like a liberation, right? Like a feeling of freedom or comfort, or that feeling you get when music's good and you're flying and you feel free, like, and I just wanted to feel like that without music. I mean, I still love music, and I still make music. I just like put out a record a month ago or something, and doing music again full time. The Rapture has been playing shows. I mean, obviously not now, but we have things scheduled for next year and all that. But yeah, I mean, I just spent most of my life miserable, even though I had gotten successful and had a kid and was married to a beautiful woman who really loved me. It was like nothing fixed me. So I just sort of, got really into mental health. And now like I life coach people 3 days a week. Most of them are artists. Like I have, professional songwriters and musicians, and then I have like artists, and just, I feel like I'm uniquely positioned to talk to artists because like I know what it's like to be in a band or go to like a festival or have managers try to screw you over. I know everything about that stuff, but I also know how to be a father, and I know how to be married and other stuff that eludes most guitar players. And like, I know how to I feel good most days, like, and I didn't most of my life. So I know that was like a very long introduction, but that's
good.
That's my story,
Yeah. And I guess for anyone like me, can you tell us what the difference is between, say, like therapy and a life coach?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, basically, it's the difference between like DIY. It's the difference between going to music school and learning a lot of scales and being able to like shred and read music on a page, or being like Paul McCartney and just like Paul McCartney doesn't know how to read music. A life coach is also, life coaching is so you don't need a degree to be a life coach. Anyone can call themselves a life coach, but if you call yourself, like if I called myself a therapist, I could get in a lot of trouble because I didn't go to Columbia University and get a PhD and, whatever. But like I got interested in it. Life coaching is also like very practical. Like it's very it's more like what it sounds like, coaching. Like, I've done everything. I've done many years of therapy. I've been involved in 12 steps. I was in a nonprofit that helped sexual abuse survivors and people from dysfunctional families. Like, I set up retreats for them all over the country, and I've mentored people all over the world from traumatic families and stuff like that. But life coaching is like but that was all very like DIY. Like, people taught me, and then I taught other people. Life coaching is very like practical. It's like, with my clients, like, they might ask about art, commerce, or they might talk about relationships or whatever, but it's usually I give them homework. Like, we'll talk about stuff for a while, and I'll be like, all right, cool, well, think about this, and in between, like, the next time we meet up, maybe do this, and then we'll talk about it. And sometimes they do, and sometimes they don't. Therapy is generally more like, it's not always goal oriented. Like, I'm kind of a sports guy. I like sport. I like action and tour and like making records and accomplishing stuff. So life coaching is very much in that vein. Like, it's very, it's just like, all right, well, it's like, what can we practically do to help you achieve whatever goal you have, whether that's, mental health or getting famous, or I don't know, whatever your goals are.
Yeah.
That's personal.
And yeah, just going back to you talking about your upbringing, and obviously been reading Meet Me in the Bathroom as like preparation for this again. And you kind of said because of your rough upbringing, you needed an aggressive energy on stage. Is that right?
I mean, I grew up as a baseball player, and my dad was really sports oriented. Like, he's a semi-professional surfer. Like, that's him on the cover of the last Rapture record.
Oh, right.
And, he's just like a surfer bro, but he's also very intellectual. Like, the story I like to tell is when I was 5 years old, we were playing one-on-one tackle American football on the beach. And he would win every time, and then like kick sand on me and like jump up and down and stuff like that. So like, I just learned that basically, I don't care how you feel, just like win, and that was a mentality that I took into music, where I was just like, all right, like, I'm going to crush all of my opponents. I've always been a friendly guy, and I like to talk, and I'm not like particularly aggressive, but I would just like stand on the side of the stage and be like, as soon as you get off the stage, like, I'm going to be better than you, like, for years, until I made a living doing that on tour,
Yeah. And do you think that kind of helped you, that attitude, or how do you look back on it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, it helped me and it destroyed me, I mean, there's no freedom or happiness in that. Like, professional athletes suffer from that all the time. And I'd really love to work with some professional athletes, because I think that there's a lot of parallels. I mean, you're essentially just a performer, but, I kind of quit baseball because I figured out that my coaches only liked me if I performed. And at the point at which I walked away from music for a substantial amount of time, it was the same thing. I had a manager who didn't care how I felt. I remember my mom committed suicide, and I was on tour in Chicago, and like, management just didn't care. Like, they just didn't care. And like, my band, like, they didn't know what to do. They didn't care. They didn't know what to do. I think it was more they didn't know what to do. And that really just like freaked me out. I was just like, wow, like, I really am like just an asset to you. Like, as long as I produce and I keep like, and when I got sober, like, I had a manager tell me that, they said, when Oasis got sober, their music got crappy, so you shouldn't stop drinking, And I was like, yeah, but I'm going to lose my marriage. And they're like, so lose your marriage, like, I don't care. Well, I don't care. Like, and that was another moment of that kind of sports thing, right? Like, as long as you win the game, like, you're my friend and I love you. And then if you don't, like, someone else will do it.
Yeah, that kind of like ruthless environment.
It's just a bully. I mean, that's the music industry, I mean, I think my goal in the rest of my life is to bring mental health to the music industry, because I don't think to be competitive, you need to be an asshole to yourself or other people. And I think, I was just like a real shithead to myself my whole life. Like, I was terrible with myself. Like, nobody could be meaner to me than I was. And I didn't see any way out of that, because that was like my training. That was like, that's just what you do.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like, I've kind of read things by different people, and basically you got to learn to let things go a lot. and not be worried about what other people are doing, really.
Well, I was trained to be hypersensitive to what other people thought. I think that's the entertainment industry in particular. Even if you're in a niche market, right, and you only care what the cool people think, like you still care what they think. So if they don't like you, then you're essentially meaningless. You're in the void. Like you've lost everything. and I used to be terrified of that. I'm no longer terrified of that, but I think that's just because I've been around long enough. I think I always knew also that the way to be a legend was to just not die. Like there's very few people in the music industry that just stick around, and don't do anything really stupid, and then you're a legend. But it sounds very simple, but it's only like less than 1% of people do that,
I'm sure it's a question you've been asked thousands of times over the years, but can you just give us an idea of how you went from starting the Rapture to eventually getting a record deal?
Well, there was many tiers of record deals, right? Like the first record deal we signed, we didn't even sign a record deal. We just put out a record with a really small kind of like arty hardcore label from San Diego that was kind of legendary in the West Coast called Gravity. And that was something I looked up to a lot. And then from there, we pretty quickly graduated to Sub Pop, which was, I just read every book about Nirvana, and, I grew up on the West Coast during the 90s. So it was like it felt very close to home. And my big, I'm going to make it in the music industry thing was like going to Seattle and signing a deal with Sub Pop, which I didn't want to sign with Sub Pop. I wanted to sign with like K Records or Kill Rock Stars, which was kind of more in line with my, how I thought about myself at the time. But, we signed a deal with Sub Pop. They gave us like $10,000. We bought a van, moved to New York, because Seattle was not really conducive to being into British music, which we were very heavily into, or just New York music. New York and Britain have like a very heavy link, it's particularly through, like the British music press, which I was totally fascinated by. Also, my mom being British and just being curious about myself in that way. And her always being in my ear and being like, "You're English." I was like, "No, I'm not from San Diego." Like, I don't know what you're talking about. But she was persistent, and we would go on vacation there. So I had seen that culture up close several times. And my dad went to university in Sussex, and that's how I met my mom. So anyway, so the first proper record deal, this was Sub Pop. They signed us for a couple of records. We were kind of in San Francisco at the time, and they were sort of signing bands from San Francisco scene. Like there was a little scene of our friends going on, and one of our friends' bands signed to Sub Pop first, and we were kind of like, all right. And then we came to New York and got involved with DFA, and I basically just got really drunk one night, and I called the owner of Sub Pop and left him this like horrendous message, just being like, "Hey, we want to be on DFA. Can you just like let us out of our contract?" And he was like, "Okay." Like, I don't want to hold, it's like, I don't want to hold you if you don't want to be. And that was a very polite thing. And I have a nice relationship with him now. That's just not what people in the music industry do. Like, they don't say, all right, he just said, give us an EP and then you're sort of free. And I said, all right. And then, went through this whole DFA thing, and then eventually signed to like a big fuck off style record contract off the back of doing touring in Europe and the UK in particular, like when House of Jealous Lovers came out, and then we were playing like every fashion party in London for about a year, something like that. And when we did that, and we kind of got signed as like the Disco Strokes. That was sort of like, I think, the mentality of record label executives at the time. And they're like, oh, we need more bands that sound like the Strokes, or that look like the Strokes. I remember we were just walking around in a park in New York, and there was all these 14-year-old girls from somewhere in the US who were on vacation, and they came up to us and they were like, "Are you guys in the Strokes?" And we're like, "Yeah." And then we took pictures with them and stuff, So like, I don't know, it was a different time. But those were the first kind of like record contracts, I suppose.
Yeah, I saw a funny quote from you and Meet Me in the Bathroom that said, people just thought of us as a Disco Strokes. They were like, "We need to sign a band like the Strokes, and you're it." and we were like, cool, here's my bank account number. So you kind of welcomed that attention in a way.
Well, I mean, all my heroes were, the blueprint for me was kind of like great rock and roll, like the Rock and Roll Swindle, like the Sex Pistols, or Nirvana was really into that. And their whole attitude was like, we're an underground band. Like, you're not going to understand us. Like, we're not even going to try. Britain had this whole like rough trade thing, right? Where you have like the Smiths and, this is the rough trade story where it's like, you can be a big indie and stuff. Like, America doesn't have any of that. So for an American band, it's just sort of like, okay, like if you want to give us $1.5 million, like that's fucking great with us, like, and we don't care if we don't care. Like, we're just having a good time,
Yeah, yeah. And like just skipping it right back to the beginning a little bit. Is it you and Vito that founded the band in 1998?
Well, I grew up with Vito as like a childhood friend. He was really more of a brother to me than like I kind of think of things in two categories. There's like my family, and Vito's like, he's like as important as my dad or my sister. And that took me a long time to figure out, because when I was a kid, we knew each other since we were 9. And like when I didn't have food in my house, I would call him and be like, do you have food in your house? And he'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, all right, I'm coming over. And I would, sometimes I would call his mom to like pick me up from places if I was stuck or something. And it was like a second home for me. And, his sister was kind of like my sister, and things like that. So, yeah, it was always me and Vito. Vito really couldn't play drums, and he wanted to be like a film maker. He went to film school. That's how I got to San Francisco. I followed him there because he was going to school in San Francisco, and I just didn't know what to do without Vito. So I was just like, the night before he left, we got really drunk, and I just was like, can I just get a ride to San Francisco with you? And I sort of, his parents just dropped me off in front of somebody's house that I knew, who like, they didn't even know I was coming, so it was like, I just wanted to be with Vito. So, and then he was going to go off and be a filmmaker. And I was like, no, you're going to play drums in my band. Like, and he was like, okay. And so that's kind of, the Rapture was basically a way to trap Vito from being a filmmaker.
Right. And did you have like a strong idea of the music you wanted to make, like kind of straight away? Or did you kind of find your feet a little bit?
I think all the Rapture happened really fast because all of my feet finding happened years previous, like in other bands. Like I worked at a lot of record stores. The Rapture was like a really airtight concept from the get-go. I mean, like the influences in the beginning were, the same things that like, you know what I mean? Like we didn't have like an embarrassing phase. Like all my embarrassing phases happened in like other music projects, but the whole point of the Rapture was like to build something that you couldn't really take down ideologically. That was really like the blueprint for me in a thinking way was, like the Melvins on the West Coast who were kind of, important. There's Black Flag, the Melvins, and like Nirvana. There's a whole lineage of that. But the Melvins' whole idea was like, at the time, bands, it was really popular to play super fast. And they were just like, all right, we're just going to do the opposite of that. And it worked. And they became like a legendary band. And for me, at the time, everybody was like, dance music sucks. And saxophones are the worst thing on earth. And, cowbell, that's like a joke. And I was like, cool, like I'll just figure out where that sounded good in history and just kind of do that. And it was very calculated. It was incredibly, I was like a philosophy major in college, and it was sort of like, also my heroes beforehand, like, Kurt Cobain or Tom York or these people, the reason why they're more successful than everybody else is they just know more about music and record collecting. And it's really a game to sort of, obviously had songwriting talent and could sing and, play guitar or whatever, but they, like if you go look up what Radiohead's influences are, like it's interesting. Or if you look up what, Nirvana's influences are, it's interesting. That's how I found out who, the Vaselines were, or like a lot of other things, or Radiohead will use like a lot of interesting instruments that other people just like, get into like avant-garde classical music, or, or the Beatles were like that too. The Beatles were just like, into really cool shit, like cooler than everybody else. Like they just knew more about stuff.
Yeah, I mean, so you said something about that when you formed a new band. Is it CD Films? And you said you just wanted, basically, you wanted to surround yourself with people that had the same music taste or music taste that you admired, rather than, I mean, and that came before any kind of music ability kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean that's the story of DIY and like kind of punk and indie, right? Is it's like, it's just, hang out with people you want to hang out with. That was something me and Vito talked about a lot too. It was like more important that we wanted to hang out with you than that you had a sort of respectable music collection. You weren't going to try to get us to play music that was terrible. That was sort of, it's like, and that's worked over and over again in my life. Like that works. Like if you just find people with good music taste and you teach them how to play something, like it will work, as long as you enjoy hanging out with them for long enough for it to not implode in the first like awkward years of it, no one caring about you.
I mean, yeah, quite a few of the people we've talked to have said a similar thing, like where most of the band, never picked up an instrument before, but they were all like-minded and they quickly knew it was going to work. Like even though, like you say, they were beginning or whatever, they could tell that something was happening pretty quickly.
Yeah, I mean the painter and saint, like the modern thinker who influences everything is Brian Eno, and like everything goes back to him. And basically, he just started talking about painting with sound, and his theory is sort of like, all the British invasion bands like Rolling Stones or whoever, they're all art students. Like they weren't like, they might have been in the Blues Breakers or something like that, but they're just art kids, and like they're painting with sound. And like all of the modern, even you get into electronic music, like you like it's getting more and more extreme. Like you could just paint by numbers or make a collage. Like you don't even have to, it's just more about your ideas. And I think that's been the goal of music, like over time. It's kind of like when photography came in, it was like, well, you don't even know how to paint. You don't even know how to paint anymore. Or like, let's just stop trying to paint realistic things because it can just make something abstract now. And that will be more interesting than doing a highly detailed nose or eyeball or something.
Yeah, and I guess a lot of musicians feel the same about equipment and stuff, where things become obsolete to other people, but they kind of try and use like old equipment or vintage equipment kind of thing.
Well, I mean, that's like, yeah, it's sort of Acid House, like, like the 303 wasn't made for what it became famous for, or just, yeah, I mean, but that's creativity. Like, I think there's so much technology right now and we haven't figured out how to use it. Like I just watched the kind of Netflix thing about, it's called, I can't remember, Social Dilemma or something. It's just about social media, but we just haven't figured out how to use all this stuff yet. And someone will come along 10, 15 years and just use it better, and that'll be cool. And everyone will be like, yeah, it's totally obvious. Of course, you're supposed to have a 303 bass line over a kick drum for 10 minutes. That totally makes sense, And
I read when you moved to, I mean, what was the idea behind moving to New York? Because when I'm reading Meet Me in the Bathroom, it sounds like not a lot of music was going on at that time in New York. Is that right?
Yeah, I mean, it was totally, I just read this book called Please Kill Me, which is sort of like the bookend to Meet Me in the Bathroom. Have you read that one?
No, I'll need to read that.
Basically about New York in the 70s. For me, Meet Me in the Bathroom was a real full circle for me. I felt like when Meet Me in the Bathroom came out, I felt like I died, in a positive way, because it was like, I moved to New York because I read this book, Please Kill Me, that was about New York in the 70s. And I knew that particular thing wasn't happening. I mean, it's about like television and suicide and kind of, David Bowie and all the Andy Warhol and stuff like that. But like, I knew that particular thing wasn't happening, but I felt an energy from reading the book that I just was very attracted to. And, music for me is really about cities and places and, context more so than anything else. I mean, I think that's another thing that makes me unique as a thinker, is that I'm not, but that's also kind of like a Brian Eno thing, or David Byrne talks about it in How Music Works, the book he wrote. Like he wrote a whole chapter about how to create a scene or how to make a band. And I think, but that's abstract thinking. It's like, I knew that New York was more important than me, and I still feel that way. Like it's bigger than me. Like being connected to something bigger than it has a history, and history also repeats in certain places and has, like, I was making the same music in Seattle that we did in New York. Like I already had all the influences, but I had to recontextualize the Rapture in New York for it to work, because the New York is the thing that set it off, because it's like, you know, if you're a tailor or you know, if you're a stylist and you're dressing someone in certain clothes, like that might work really well in a certain context, or it might not, you know, and bands are just kind of like clothing or fashion, you know, not to put down fashion. I think fashion is really powerful, but like the context in which you put something into is more important than the thing itself.
Yeah, I also read that you said when Matt joined the band in New York, that was like a pivotal moment where you felt like you had to raise your own standards as well.
Well, Maddie went to music school. Like that was the thing. Me and Vito were just like kind of, you know, we were good, but like Maddie was like in NYU jazz school, like literally going to jazz jam sessions and studying Clifford Brown or like whatever jazz guy, and like, you know, he could really play, and like, you know, it was sort of like he was a professional athlete. Like we were just guys like in the park, you know, I mean, we were good and stuff like that, but he had kind of this different attitude that was a bit more, I think it's kind of like when Nirvana, you know, had these drummers that were okay, and then they got Dave Grohl, and it was kind of like, all right, like we can actually, like I already had the idea, like some of the bass lines on the early Rapture stuff, like I wrote those bass lines, but I, you know, like, so I already had like the idea of what I wanted it to sound like, but having somebody who could actually play it convincingly was an important part of the puzzle for sure.
And yeah, I just wanted to ask you about some of the jobs you had in New York. I read that you were delivering food, and like you ended up delivering it randomly to the likes of Joey Ramone and the Beastie Boys.
Yeah, I mean, well, I worked at like a very famous macrobiotic restaurant, which I don't know if you know anything about macrobiotics, but it's like something celebrities like, and it was like invented by this Japanese guy, and it's like anti-nightshade vegetables. Like you're not supposed to eat like tomatoes and potatoes because they grow at night, and that's bad for your energy or something. It's like some like very specific thing, and so yeah, I worked there. I used to make juice for Russell Simmons and Kate Moss every day, and I didn't know who they were. And people would be like, "Do you know that you just made juice for Kate Moss?" And I'd be like, "No, who's that?" You know. And then I figured out, or like this guy's. I didn't know who Russell Simmons was either. Like this, you know, like Molly Ringwald, like all these celebrities would come in all the time, and it's just kind of a New York place that, before I moved to New York, it just was unimaginable. But if you live in a certain area of New York, like you see celebrities all the time, and that was very inspiring to me, because it just felt like, yeah, this is just that dumb guy who drinks juice every day. Like it, and I talked to him, and he's just like, I hear him talking to other people, and it's like, I mean, yeah, he has nice sneakers or whatever, but it's not necessarily out of my reach. You know, it's like, oh, like I could be on the other side of the counter. Like someone could be making me a juice one day, and that would be just fine.
And then was it Plant Bar as well, where, I mean, that sounded like a crazy place to work, but in a good way.
Plant Bar is just a really magical, I mean, I really lived like like I couldn't have drawn it up in a more fantasy way. I think that's why I got into mental health afterwards, because like it couldn't have been more dreamlike, or like I really was the fairy princess, or the, you know, the Snow White character. Like it just, like every perfect thing happened to me. Plant Bar was like the coolest bar of its era, and everyone who was in that place is either successful or dead. And you know, it just created sort of modern thought in New York, and it was a very small place, but I was also seeking those places. That's what I found out about reading books like, you know, Please Kill Me and other things, or watching music documentaries, is like there's always these little spots, isn't there? I mean, like if you study sort of British punk culture, there was like this weird reggae bar where Susie Sue, Johnny Lydon, and like Robert Smith and The Clash and all those bands you think of, they all just hung out together. But it was just some like shitty bar they found that they were like, they didn't want to hang out with everybody else. They're just like, we're going to find this. And that's why they're all influenced. They have a reggae influence, because there's a DJ there, and the DJ played reggae, and it was literally just them and nobody else. And they just hung out in this place for a long time. And that was like, you know, or like like sort of the French painters who hung out in Montmartre all together, you know, like in the 20s or whenever it was. But if you just sort of study art history, you figure out that that's what it's all about. And it's more about being in your generation. Like I wanted to be part of a generation because those are the artists that influenced me. So Plant Bar was very much like that place. And, you know, to be able to luck into finding or helping to create those places. I mean, we created that place. Like, you know, that was back when DFA was a gang. And like, I just saw James Murphy every day for years. Like no one will ever see James every day forever again. You know what I mean? But like, I saw him every day for years. And like, we would just talk about it. Like we were all reading the same books and aware of the same history. And Tim Goldsworthy, who was part of the early DFA, was kind of part of MOAX. And he had felt like MOAX like could have been that, but like didn't necessarily achieve it. And so he was kind of second time around. He was like, all right, like here's what we got to do next time so that, you know, it happens better. And so it was all very like conscious. It wasn't everyone there knew exactly what was happening. And I think that that's in a way kind of what made it happen.
Yeah. I mean, one thing we asked bands is whether they felt part of a community of bands. And in Britain, there definitely seems to have happened like that at different kind of scenes up and down the country. But I read that with the Plant Bar in mind and stuff, I read that you said we had to make our own scene, but did that kind of evolve in places like Plant Bar?
Yeah, exactly. That's what Plant Bar was. It was kind of like, you know, the Strokes and Interpol and the Yeah Yeah Yeahs and all the other bands that were around, TV on the Radio and the, you know, Gang Gang Dance and Animal Collective, and they all like came by and we were aware of them, but we were very exclusionary, you know. DFA, the whole point of DFA, it was like to be a scene within a scene. So that's kind of back to that Melvins thing where it's like you're aware of what is kind of the cool thing at the moment, and then you just kind of go against it in a way while being friends with it. Like the Melvins still played, like they would always, every show they played was with bands that played really fast, and they were the only band that would play slow. So they were still friendly with all those people, and they stayed at their house on tour, and they probably, you know, got drunk with them or whatever, hung out. But being cooler than the cool people is like a very, very specific way of approaching art that has historically produced the best art, really.
And another thing, like that the British bands that I spoke to have said is like there was a scene, but you know, a lot of the bands sounded different. Is that something you felt like there was no one that was really copying each other at the beginning?
I mean, yes and no. I mean, you know, LCD Sound System started as a band because somebody needed to open for the Rapture, and James used to be our sound guy for years. Like when we played Trash in London or a lot of other things, like James was our sound guy, and he came over and he sat in all the early like record deal meetings and all that stuff, and he was kind of trying to protect us in a way. But, you know, LCD Sound System was created because there was no one else that sounded like the Rapture, and we needed an opening band that didn't sound like Black Dice. And he was just like, all right, cool. Like, I'm going to start a studio project. And when you're in New York, I will open for you guys so that it feels like there's something going on. And then after we had played in Optimo in Glasgow, like, and became friendly with them, we had played there a couple times. And then, you know, James put out the first LCD 7-inch or whatever it was, and the guys in Optimo were like, hey, well, can you guys, the Rapture have already played here a few times and it was really fun, and will you guys come and play for us? And he was just like, I don't know, like I didn't even really think of playing outside of New York opening for the Rapture. So then he borrowed all of our like kind of guitar road cases and stuff like that and put together a band. And he was like, well, who should I get in my band? And I was just like, well, like at the time, Tyler Pope, who was bass player of Chick 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 and some other things, I'd known him for a long time. I was like, he's pretty much like the best musician I know. So if you get him, like your band will be really solid. And then so like that's basically what happened, you know. And then after that, I remember right after kind of House of Jealous Lovers came out, we were making a video with somebody, and he was like, the video director was like, there's this band that has a record and it sounds like half the record sounds like the Rapture, and then the other half sounds like the Strokes, and that was Franz Ferdinand.
Right.
And that was that song "Take Me Out," and like half of it's kind of jerky.
Yeah.
And then it kind of sounds like maybe the Rapture, and then the other parts like the Strokes. So it was like, all right. And then the Libertines came, like all that stuff. So it was like, but yeah, I mean, the Rapture was very positioned as kind of being, there was just nothing around us, and then there is everything around us. And then from there, all of my friends went from like not being into dance music and being like, that's stupid, why are you buying Acid House 12 inches and disco 12 inches and stuff, and then to like now, like our friend Dave Diaz is Making Time, or like there's this club called Good Room. There's all these things, like there's so many of my friends like are completely defined by dance music now. Like that's all they do, that's their life, and they've become, they'll be doing that till they die, which is just such a weird position to be in, particularly coming from like a band background.
Yeah. And just going back to the scene in New York, because I've heard like the Strokes talk when they get asked about Meet Me in the Bathroom book, they kind of say it's a bit of a myth that there was a scene or community of bands, but you're saying there definitely was one, like in and around DFA and the Plant Bar and stuff.
That was only for the Strokes. The thing that made the Strokes really interesting, like everyone wanted to hate the Strokes because the Strokes were like rich kids who basically went to England and signed a rough trade, and we were like, fuck you guys, like we couldn't buy our own plane ticket, and they also were the only band that didn't know everybody. Like I was listed off all those other bands a minute ago, but we all knew each other and nobody knew the Strokes. And I remember there was this fashion guy who I used to have a party at Plant Bar on Monday nights, and there was these fashion guys that would hang out there with like Chloe Sevigny and whoever, like New York hipster people, and the people from the movie Kids and all this stuff. And I remember Julian Casablancas came to my party to fight. He just showed up one time, like really drunk. And he's like, I remember talking to him and I was like, hey man. And he's like a really big dude. Like, I don't know if you ever met him, but he's like 6'4". He's like huge, like, I don't know if you ever met like Jack White, but like Jack White is like a big dude. Like I remember when Jack White punched the dude in the Von Bondies or whatever.
Yeah.
And I remember just being like, and then I saw Jack White and I was just like, oh my God, like if that guy fucking punched you, it would just suck, but anyway, like, so Julian shows up and he's like, hey, is like so-and-so here? Cause I came here to like fight him. And we are all just like, whoa, dude, chill out, cause they like hung out at this bar that was a few blocks away by themselves and they didn't talk to anybody. I remember when, like, the reason why the Yeah Yeah Yeahs got a record deal was because the Strokes went on Saturday Night Live, which in the US is like a really big deal. And the guitar player was wearing a Yeah Yeah Yeahs button, Albert Hammond Jr. or whatever that guy's name is. But like, and I remember watching it and being like, whoa, there's a band from New York on TV. And also they're wearing a Yeah Yeahs button. As soon as I saw that, I was like, oh, they're the next band that's getting signed. And of course, like they were the next band that got signed. So it was like, but yeah, it's like so weird because the Strokes were completely apart. They weren't friends with anybody. Like nobody knew them. Like the first time I ever like legitimately met the Strokes was at a music festival in a stadium in Japan in a backstage. That was the first time I had met them. You know what I mean? Like, and they were like headlining, or they were playing right before Radiohead in like a stadium, in like a football stadium in Japan for 30,000, like 50,000 people or whatever it was.
Yeah.
And like I had never had a conversation with them before that, and neither did anybody else except for maybe the yeah. Like it's very strange. So like this band comes out of nowhere, they define the New York scene, and they kind of made it possible too. I remember going to the magazine store down the street from my house to buy NME, and because the Strokes were in it, and with the White Stripes, so it was like the Strokes and the White Stripes, and the White Stripes were from Detroit, so, and they were very much like knew more people, and they were more part of the DIY, but the Strokes are just such like an anomaly, like such a strange story, but also like pretty good. I remember we all like wanted to hate them. We were like, fuck these guys, like, I remember I was walking to work at Plant Bar one time, and they were doing a photo shoot on the way to work. I lived 2 blocks away, and they were doing a photo shoot outside of what I later learned was where they recorded their first record, in front of a cause that is like a famous graffiti artist, like a cause piece. And like they're all standing. I remember walking by and just feeling hatred. I just remember and just staring at them, being like, "Fuck you guys! Like you guys have everything that I want, and I don't know you." And then kind of cut to seeing them play and their first record coming out and being like, this is like, and like my wife like really liked that record, and I was like, you're not really allowed to like that record. You're supposed to be on my side. You know what I mean? Like, it's not cool. Like, and then I was like, yeah, these guys are good. And then I became really grateful to them because, without them, a band like the Rapture would never have signed like a big record contract. So, kind of completely changed for me over time.
You mentioned the years, and I just wanted to mention a story where one day you're working at Plant Bar and Karen O just walked in and asked for some like advice about whether she should be in the band or not or something.
Yeah, I mean, she was just feeling kind of wily, and she was good friends with like the person that was managing us at the time. It was just a friend, and she came in and she was just really sad, and she was kind of like, I think it was right after the Strokes had been on TV with this like badge on, and she was just like, hey, should I quit music? And I was like, just wait like about 6 months and you'll be doing everything you want to do. And she's like, yeah, but I don't know if like I'm cut out for this or I'm good enough and stuff. And I'm like, no, it's totally gonna work. Also, like she was dating the guy from The Liars at the time, and he's another huge dude. There's a lot of huge dudes in indie rock. I think he's even bigger than Julian Casablancas. And like, the rumor was that she wasn't allowed to talk to me, because he was kind of jealous or something. And he was just like, you're not allowed to talk to Luke, but like, I just heard all this stuff secondhand. But like, I mean, we were all so close and so young. I mean, I'm 45 now, but, I was like in my 20s, I was 24 or something like that.
I just wanted to ask you about your relationship with James Murphy and how that worked. Reading Meet Me in the Bathroom and stuff, it kind of seemed like he's a bit of a father figure with you, and like, but you said he's also quite almost overbearing at points.
He's an overbearing father figure, and I think a lot of people experience him that way. He's very confident. I don't know if you've ever met him before, but he's really well spoken. He's very sure of himself. James was a terrifying person for me to meet because he was the first person that I ever met who was like kind of psychologically stronger than I was, in the sense that he could just get people to do what he wanted them to do. And that was always what I was, I always had the ideas and I'd be like, you're going to do what I want. And if you don't, I'll figure out a way to get you to do it. And he was better at that than me. So it was actually kind of a crisis for me. And part of what led to my whole like eventual mental health, we were actually going to the same therapist at the time. And we would go in and complain about each other. And he would talk about it with us and stuff. And he died. Our therapist died. There's this really great guy called George. And James wrote a song about him called Someone Great, which is on Sound of Silver. And in the album credits, which nobody reads anymore, but in there, it's like kind of dedicated to this therapist guy, George. And, George was really a father to both of us. He was like this Eastern European guy who had ran away from his country because the government wanted to kill him for being like an intellectual. And I think he was the therapist of somebody in the Strokes too. And like, he would talk to us about that. I think he was also a therapist of like Harmony Korine, the filmmaker guy. And so, yeah, he was like the caretaker of like all the, smart, young, angry guys. And he was wonderful. And like, James used to see him like twice a week or 3 times a week. Sometimes I would see him like, once a week because I couldn't really afford it. I don't know. James also sort of figured things out a bit earlier than me. He's a little older. He was also more seasoned. Like he was on tour earlier. Me and James just had a very James was such a powerful thing for me too, because he really got me like on a level that I had never been understood before. Like he really got why I liked the records that I liked and why I wanted to combine the things I wanted to combine. It was just a really once in a lifetime perfect relationship. And I'm sure if you interviewed him, he would say the same thing, that we just really, it was very similar to like a romance, like in the sense that when you kind of mind meld with somebody and they really change you on a molecular level. Like I was very changed by him, and I know that he was very changed by me. And, when I see him, it's still very much like that. I don't see him all the time, but when I do, it feels like no time has passed, and the conversation's very easy, and we can finish each other's sentences and stuff like that. So I feel like he's definitely in the music family, and I'm hoping that DFA is going through a bit of a kerfuffle right now, but I'm hoping that James is talking about getting involved again with DFA, so we'll see what happens. I mean, more will be revealed later. James is like he's just somebody that I root for, you know what I mean? Like whatever he does, I feel like I'm doing it too, in a way. Like when LCD finally played, they did their last concert at Madison Square Garden, which turned out to be bullshit, wasn't their last concert, and I think he did all that on purpose, although I don't know if he'd admit it or not. But anyway, like I went to that, and I remember I knew everybody on stage, and I was just watching this concert in this huge place. And I just felt like I don't really need to do that now. Like my musical family is already, Plant Bar is playing Madison Square Garden, and Plant Bar as an idea has completely flowered and, died and went to seed again. And that's great. And I felt like we as a community had accomplished what we set out to do, and that I needed to go figure out how to be a father and be married and like myself, because at that time I still was really at war with my own energy. Like my mind was my worst enemy, and it was, it felt like it was trying to kill me. It was really just, my mind was really just trying to alert me that, I needed to take care of some damage from my childhood and some other, generational traumas and stuff like that, which I've done, but yeah, that was a very long, circuitous answer to James Murphy, but
no, that's good. Yeah.
Love him, love James Murphy, and hope that he's, around, that I get to spend as much time with him in this life, and even if I'm not spending time with him, I just like hearing about him. You know what I mean? Like when I hear James is doing something, and he's really good at, creating mythology, which is something that we always talked about. The biggest part of being in a band isn't what you do, it's about what people think you do, so it's like he's a master of smoke and mirrors and perception, which is, Bowie is kind of his hero on that, but it's just like, just get people to think you're doing stuff. It doesn't matter if you actually did it or not.
And I've obviously got to ask you about House of Jealous Lovers. Like, first of all, how do you come up with a song like that? And do you know when you're writing that it's going to be as big as it was?
I don't think you can have a cultural impact and conscious and know something like that. I don't think it would work. I would love to try, maybe, I've been producing some music and stuff, and maybe in my production life, I'll be able to manufacture cultural moment. But I think it's about context, and House of Jealous Lovers was, I think there has to be a certain naive element to change history in a way. Like, I think, I had gotten all these tracks records, like the House Music Anthem, and I really like this song No Way Back by Adonis and these other things. And I was like, I don't have a drum machine yet. I mean, eventually we got an 808 and all this, whatever. We just bought stuff. But in the beginning, it was like, and DFA had some of that stuff, but it was kind of like just this attempt to, it's really more of an idea, House of Jealous Lovers. And just, it's like, also, like, I was so angry. I mean, like, when I listened to that record, it's just like, I was like fucking pissed, like, I don't know if I'll ever be that angry again. Like, it's just rage. And James managed to like get it on record, and Tim doesn't get a lot of credit for House of Jealous Lovers, but he was really huge in that, because now James knows how to do a lot of things that Tim Goldsworthy does, but at the time he didn't, and Tim was really interested in, combining, Perubu with T-Rex and Acid House, it's like, and he was like, oh yeah, I get, like as a Brit coming from that culture, and just like, being into kind of like Happy Mondays and Screamadelica by Primal Scream, stuff like that, or just, that kind of era of, 808 State or what, all these things, Manchester and the Hacienda and stuff like that. But Yeah, I mean, it's a very American record too. Like a British band couldn't have made that record. And there's a lot of things that I see about it now, and I go like, "Oh, that's why it changed stuff," or "That's why it was an influential record." But at the time, it was just like, like I read, there's recently a oral history of krautrock that came out. I think it's just called Electricity, and it's just when you read it, you realize that the birth of krautrock is really just like five guys, and it's like they all broke off and did different stuff, but that's really what DFA was like. It was just like me, James, Tim, and not a lot of else, and it was just like we just had these ideas and we knew we were right, and we knew what kind of record it had to be. And James knew, like, he used to like antagonize me in the studio, like, he wasn't taking care of my mental health, like, I'll tell you that. He was basically like, "You're hungover, great, like, you're fucking mad at me right now, put it on the record," like, we're like, that record is so, like, when I listen to Echoes, the record now, it's just sharp, like, it's really, I used to watch Don't Look Back, the Bob Dylan movie, every single day, and like there's a part where he's getting interviewed by Time Magazine. He's just like, "Fuck you, Time Magazine guy, like, you don't understand me." And I don't know if you know the particular interview I'm talking about, but it's like really, it's really, you should look it up. It's like fucking great. But I would watch that, and then I was really into like Public Image Limited, Metal Box era Johnny Lydon, who had based his character in that album period on, he went to go see, I think it was like Macbeth, or like he was basically playing like a Shakespearean Mad King in those records. And I was cultivating very much like that sort of thing. I was channeling a lot of mental illness. My mom was very unstable as a kid. Like, she was suicidal, and I visited her in mental hospitals. And there was times when she would lose consciousness with reality for weeks, and she would be on like a lot of drugs, and legal drugs, like heavily medicated and stuff, and she didn't know where she was, and there would just be parts of her that would come out of her that were so raw, and they would just, the self-loathing and but also the kind of clarity that comes from somebody who's bipolar, who's like, I don't know how much experience you have with mental illness in your family or close to you, but, bipolar people can be at once like incredibly incisive and very tuned into frequencies and things other people aren't, in a way that's profound and deep, but also can be at the same time, in the same sentence, even maybe like completely off base. And it's traumatic growing up with that as a kid. And House of Jealous Lovers for me was really the feeling of chaos that I felt, my parents being jealous of each other, and then also becoming like a young sexual man and feeling other people taking ownership of my body, and like a lot of stuff, like it just uncorked. I was also very interested in the work of, on the first like John Lennon solo records, where like a song like Mother, or like he was really studying with Arthur Janoff, who's wrote the book Primal Scream. Before the band, there's a book called Primal Scream is a therapy modality, and there's a book called Primal Scream, and like actually the first Tears for Fears record is entirely based on this book also, which is interesting. So it just, it's just kind of like raw therapy. I think in a way House of Jealous Lovers is the last emotional record, in the sense that Joni Mitchell started confessional songwriting in the 70s. Like, she was the first person that was just like, all right, I'm just going to write about how I'm feeling today and breaking up with my boyfriend and being depressed and stuff like that. And then in the 90s, you had essentially trauma on stage, like Kurt Cobain, Tom York, and then just all of that kind of bloodletting, like, oh, we're just going to put all just traumatic stuff on stage. And then House of Jealous Lovers, in a way, to me, feels like it finishes the cycle in the same way that extreme metal or something does. It's like, it's kind of like you can't really go any farther than that into that particular cubby, that particular rabbit hole.
And yeah, and obviously got to talk about the fact that it shelved for a year, and you kind of, there was things in the book that said that you felt there was way too much production on it. Is that right?
No, I mean that's a way better story. So I should probably
Right, okay.
I should probably just shut up and say yes, that's true because it's more interesting. But for me, it was a really boring thing of I had a delay pedal, like a guitar delay, and I couldn't figure out how to use it. Like now, I could set it up in about 30 seconds or faster and figure out how I want the repeats to happen and stuff like that. But it just like the delay on the guitar wasn't repeating in the way that I wanted, and I wanted to fix it. And that got spun into like the mythology and what gets talked about in the book and stuff, which is a way better story, is just that I was afraid of that record coming out, which that's great. Like I should just go with that. So yeah, I was super scared that the record was going to come out and that my life was going to be, I don't know. I mean, there was a lot of, I think, had our record come out after the Franz Ferdinand record, which may not have happened because I don't know if Franz Ferdinand happens without House of Jealous Lovers, but like if assuming that it did, like it would have been a very fast process for us to like sign a record deal and stuff. But because we were kind of coming off the back of the Strokes and we didn't sound exactly like the Strokes, like, Echoes as a record is referencing music history in general. Like it just, there's slow songs and there's all different genres in there. The Strokes is kind of just like, it's not like the Ramones, but it's similar. It's like, it kind of sounds, every Strokes song kind of sounds like a Strokes song. That's awesome. I like the Ramones, I like things that are monograms or that are just, singular burst of energy. But, the Rapture is like a kind of we're sort of weird. And like, I think it took a while for record companies to give us the amount of money and control that we wanted because we are weird. And I think, when House of Jealous Lovers came out, like no major label would have signed that. They, it came out and it came out on 12-inch, like a really long time before the record came out. And that was, a blessing and a curse. It's probably bad financially and maybe in terms of a career. But to be honest with you, House of Jealous Lovers also was a confusing record for me because it was like all I ever wanted to do. Like to put out, in dance music culture, it's not about records, it's about 12 inches. And like to put out a 12-inch that changed dance music history, it's kind of like, all right, I'm done. Like I don't need to do anything else. Like that was awesome. Like I'm done now. Like I worked in a lot of record stores and I just wanted to put out like one record that was kind of historical, and but that's like an obscene goal. Like, I mean, a lot of, that's a hard thing to pull off, and there's a lot of grace involved and kind of just, it's out of your control. But it was also a very like stunning thing, just like how successful that record was. Like, I still kind of haven't gotten over it, to be honest with you. I mean, I go out and people play House of Jealous Lovers, like, before the pandemic was like sort of had a rebirth and people were playing it a bunch. And then I don't know, it's weird. Like I'm going to die and like on my tombstone, it's just going to be like House of Jealous Lovers guy. Like, and like, I'm like, honestly, like I'm pretty cool with that in a way. That's kind of my version of like a Daft Punk helmet. It's kind of like, it's so blinding and it kind of kills everything around it. So in a way, like I'm just like completely free, it's like, I'm the House of Jealous Lovers guy, and that's cool. Like I'm cool with it now because it killed me, like I'm an undead creature.
I mean, it was a huge part of club nights in the UK. I mean, if you listen to that song now, it like kind of takes you right back to that time kind of thing. It's definitely one of the soundtracks of that time.
Yeah, I mean, for me too, I remember one of the experiences of my life, the first time I heard that in a club, and like, it sounds good in a club, and that was a thing that like at the time, like indie records didn't sound good in clubs. Like if you were an indie band, like, that, I don't know, it's just massive. And then just being in nightclubs, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but just, being in a nightclub and then the whole night peaking on that song, or just being in a place where everyone's like losing their fucking mind. And like, it's sort of related to you. Like, I'm like, all right, that's me, I guess. But also you're kind of in it too, because you're not really like playing at the time and you're just kind of there. It's very odd. It's just like I wish that everybody I know could just have the experience that I have when that happens, or especially when it happened the first time. Now I'm a little bit numb to it, or it's different, but the first time it happened, I remember just being like, what is going on? Like, I'm not prepared for this. Like, I don't have any context for this. What is this?
So the idea that you kind of butting heads with James Murphy over production, was that kind of overplayed in the book, do you think?
No, it's not overplayed at all. I mean, James, like, when we left DFA, James, you know, he talks about it in the book, but like, he just decided that his only reason for living was to kill me or just to erase me. Like, remember in the top of the conversation, we're talking about my dad kicking sand on me on the beach and me being hyper competitive and stuff. Like, DFA was so competitive. We thought we were so much better than everybody else. Like, we were friendly with the IES, but we were way better than them. And we were friendly with everybody and we were polite when we talked to them, but behind closed doors, and when we were making that record, we were just like, this is better than everybody else. Fuck you guys. Fuck everybody. And like, we were like a club, you know? And like, James used to like to use this analogy for trust that was super fucked up, which was the way that you know that you can trust someone is it's like tying your hands together. And then in the other hand, you each have a knife, and that's how you keep each other accountable. And that's just like fucked up, man. And like, you know, that's how we operate. And he kind of was like, all right, we're going to do this dance now. And I was like, I don't know, dude, that doesn't sound, can we just chill? Like, I'm from California. Can we just be more mellow? Like, I don't know, really, you know? And, you know, he just kind of carried that on. And that made me feel really sick because I went from being like super good pals with this guy and feeling like he was building me up, and he was like, you know, you're the most talented guy I've ever met, and the Rapture is all about you, and your songs are incredible, and your record collection is incredible, and like, I'm going to help you succeed in all of your ideas, and we're going to make this record together, and the label is going to take over the world, and we're going to travel around together, and we're like a unit, like we're kind of married in a way, like we're really, you know, we're tight, we're thick as thieves. To go from that to fuck you, my band's gonna be bigger than your band, and you don't even exist to me, and everything that we did before is bullshit now. And that really was a house of jealous lovers. So, you know, we kind of, and that kind of that did my head in, you know. That was another reason to get into mental health, was because it was just like, that is not the end result that I wanted. I didn't want to like fight my best friends or like get, you know what I mean? It just felt like fucking terrible. It was just like, man, like, this sucks so hard. Like, this is not the party that I signed up for. Like, this was really fun until it wasn't fun. And then it was really not fun.
Yeah.
And I think those things have changed since now. And, you know, we're older, have kids and stuff like that. And, you know, I don't know what will happen in the future, and I'm glad that those things happened, to be honest with you, because it was just like, and that was one of the reasons, you know, I'd love to write a book about how to have a successful collaboration with somebody, or how to be, you know, in a healthy partnership creatively. Because I'm doing it now, and I think I was looking for a blueprint, and the only blueprint I had was my family growing up, and that's what we did to my family. You know, my mom turned on me and she killed herself. You know, I'm really grateful that James didn't take his own life. You know, and I'm sure, I don't know if he was considering it or not. You know, there was a time when I could have done that, maybe. You know, but I just had this woman that loved me so much, and I had a child, and I was like, I need to be a father for this child, so I'm going to get my shit together and not kill myself, or, you know, but I think, yeah, it was just, I didn't want to do it a third time. You know, DFA, James Murphy was a reenactment of my relationship with my mom and dad growing up and how they treated each other. Except for I was now in the parental role. And like, I was just like, I don't, you know, that was very painful, but also great, you know, because like, if I didn't, I feel like the universe, you know, cosmically kind of set me up to meet James Murphy and just get my ass handed to me, but also like fall in love, you know what I mean? Like, it really is like a first romance or a high school, you know, where the first person you kiss and you just think like, I'm going to be with this person forever. I know it's crazy that I feel like I'm going to be with this person forever, but I really want to. And then then when you break up and you feel like you're just going to die, or something. So I think, but those things are great. Like if they don't kill you and you're able to find a life coach or find somebody who can actually sort of sort it out for you and talk to you about it. So you don't just do your own head in and, but yeah, I think James, I don't know. I think hopefully he's in a better place now, I don't know. I mean, I really, at some point I just had to completely just worry about myself, even the guys in the Rapture, I was just like, I can't even like fucking talk to you guys for a while. Like Vito, for example, I was just like, I love you, man, but like, I can't drink beers with you anymore. Like, and I gotta go learn how to feel my feelings. Otherwise I'm going to implode because, like my mom had just died and no one could really talk to me about that. So I had to go off and find some people to talk to about suicide and about, all of these things. Cause it's like a heavy thing. Like when you're, in 2006, my mom took her own life. I was 31. Like when you're 31, like, how do you deal with your mom killing herself? It's like getting in a tour bus and making another record isn't necessarily going to sort you out. I mean, I tried it, but it didn't work. Like it made it worse, and, being around people that are just like, okay, time to get on stage, go to sound check and stuff. Like I was like dying, I was like dying inside. So I think, getting just go, that's my experience, that's what happened to me back at age 31 and 24 and all that.
Like you say, you had a relationship with England and Britain through your mum, and linking that with House of Jealous Lovers, because I was watching a video today of you performing that song at Glastonbury, and Bez comes on stage to dance with you.
Yeah. Manchester crossover or whatever. He just kept shouting like Manchester, New York crossover and stuff. And like that day, he showed up to this. He had someone drive him, and he crashed into the stage. Like they must have just been up drinking all night or getting high. And like he showed up and he had this like trash bag full of really cheap weed, and he was just like. And then I sort of just like wanted to hang out with him because I was like a Happy Mondays fan. And he was like, cool, let's go to like Joe Strummer just died. So he was like, let's go to like Joe Strummer's grave or something. And there was this weird sort of setup they had in Glastonbury. It was like a tribute to Joe Strummer. And we just went there and he was like smoking weed. And I was just kind of like hanging out with him in the middle of the day with like a lot of mud and stuff. And then it's just a fucking bizarre day. And then, we played. And then, I remember I was really mean to Lauren Laverne that day, but like not on purpose or something. Like she was trying to talk to me, and later on she was like, yeah, I tried to talk to you right after that, and you were like a real dick to me or something. I was like, oh man, it sucks. Like, sorry, but it's just like a very strange day. And then, you're at Glastonbury, so there's all these like sort of rock stars and important people milling about, and I don't know, like I don't even know how I got there. Like I look back on that stuff, and every once in a while I get beamed back into that arena, like a few years ago, I was performing with David Byrne from Talking Heads, or like, doing these things, like playing a show with Pharoah Sanders, or like you get beamed into these kind of like strange situations and you're like, okay, I guess I'm there. There's always this kind of thing where you're just like, is this really me? Like, am I here? Like, am I this important? Just like, do I warrant being in a YouTube clip, or like I don't know. It's just very, very odd. Like, for me, like I wanted to open for Fugazi. That was like my big goal. And that was like a thing that James and Tim did that was really special, that I credit them with, which is, American Touring Underground in the 80s or 90s was really all about two bands. It's Fugazi and the Jesus Lizard. And like, they were the two best live bands. And Fugazi used to take young bands on tour, and they were just like life-changing. Their records are okay, but they're, as a live band, they're just in the community they created. And I just, wanted to open for Fugazi, and that was something that my friends did. So, I knew that it was within reach, but it was kind of like James and Tim were just like, no, like you need to aim higher. You need to, go to Glastonbury with Bez or something. I mean, they weren't saying that, but that's where it went to.
Yeah. And I mean, you obviously had a very strong relationship with England, and you said people assumed you were English.
I think that's just because I have like a Beatles haircut and, sort of dress like what most people think English people dress like. I mean, in some sort of fantasy American way, like wear cardigans and stuff, like, which is what my grandfather wore, was like Welsh guy. But like, I mean, yeah, I mean, I think England, I also, it's just such like a magical place for me. Like, it just felt like something that was safe for me to go into. My dad went to university with this guy who was also became a university professor, and sent his son over, and his son became like a huge influence on me. And he was this kid that grew up in London named Dan, and Dan's now in the band Loop because his favorite band is Loop, and like he eventually got in it somehow because he was on like a fan chat board or something, and he eventually like got in the band, so now he's like in the band. But he grew up in that London time where everyone was kind of wearing black, and he's going to see Loop and like Spaceman 3 and whoever. But he's just into like wah-wahs and drones and stuff like that. But like he had this like amazing record collection, and he came over, and I just like wanted to be him, and I remember memorizing his record collection. He would make me tapes of stuff, and anytime I would see a record that he had in his record collection, I would just buy it for years. Like, even if I didn't know what it was, like I just memorized, he had all this, like Chrome and Suicide and Roxy Music, a lot of things that became kind of Rapture influences where this guy, Dan Boyd, who just, he was into the Seeds and like, all these things, all Black Sabbath and lots of stuff that I hadn't even really considered before. And he was just like, no, he was sort of like the most educational guy, and he was British. So like he used to wear Beatle boots around. So I started wearing like Beatle boots around, and like nobody in San Diego wears Beatle boots. Like that's just like, if you're in San Diego, I mean, everyone's on a skateboard with flat baseball hats and like, tattoos and shorts and stuff. And I was like, I was trying my hardest to dress like my friend Dan, who just looked like some guy from London. And kind of, there's a book called A Scene in Between. Do you know that book?
No.
It's just a photo book of like English 80s DIY stuff,
Okay.
like bands and people that hung out around bands and stuff like that. And I was just trying to basically look like I was in that book, sort of eventually combined with Fugazi always had parkas, like they had a certain, and then in San Diego, there was these kids that I found, and they just dressed like Spock from Star Trek, like dyed black hair, stay pressed pants, and like, parkas and stuff like that. So it's sort of like, fashion was like a really big element, particularly of like being British. Like I guess that's the difference between England and the US is like, being a teenager is really about fashion in a very extreme way comparatively to other cultures. Like, the only parallels maybe like Japan is even more extreme, right? But it's like, British kids, like they really dress up, and their music is very personal to them, like in a way that is different than it's very unique, and I felt like it was also, I think journalism played a huge part for me, like watching music documentaries and reading British music press, like, just the idea of how important British music press made things. Like there's no equivalent until the first, like, US had little pocket stuff, but like when Pitchfork kind of took over. But before Pitchfork, it was sort of like the British music press sort of dictated to the world what was cool in a lot of ways, going back to, I guess, like the 50s or 60s or whatever, right? So it's like kind of NME and Melody Maker and all the different magazines and press. And also you could be like kind of the idea of being like a journalist star. Like I looked up to those people, like I remember when I worked at Plant Bar, there was a whole bunch of the British journalists would hang out there, like Simon Reynolds and other important characters. And like, I would trade them. I read all of their books, and I would like trade them drinks for mixtapes of, Austin Trip to the Moon, or like shit that I couldn't, like weird British rave records that like there was no way I could find in the US. Now you could just go on YouTube and look at it, but in 2000 or 2001, it was like there was no YouTube. There was no YouTube. So you had to like know a British journalist like to get that to work.
Did that thing happen to the Rapture that happens to, or has happened to American bands, where you almost make it in England before you make it in America type thing?
Well, that was very conscious too. I mean, I was mentioning I watched the Bob Dylan documentary, Don't Look Back, but that's the blueprint, right? Like the whole documentary is about his first tour of England and how that was when he became famous. And, that's what happened with Jimi Hendrix, and that's what happened with Nirvana, and that's what happened with the Strokes. So when it happened with the Strokes, I was like, it just ticked a box for me. It really opened me up and was like, history is repeating itself. And also there's a really hard connection between New York and, the British music press, like Bob Dylan, Jimi Hendrix, not Nirvana, but the Strokes. And, those are all New York. I mean, Jimi Hendrix came to England from New York. So I was like very aware of that. I was like, there's a gateway here. Or all of the punk bands like, Television and the Ramones and Suicide and Blondie and the Talking Heads, all these New York bands, like they got popular in New York. And that was what Please Kill Me, the book, was about. And that's what Meet Me in the Bathroom, the book, is about. It's really New York bands get popular in England and then conquer the world or whatever, do interviews later on podcasts or whatever it is. But like, that's the pattern, right? And that worked. And that's, my dad's a university professor, so his approach to everything is just like research is king. So if you understand, and that's been the theme of our conversation, right? It's just like, do your homework. And I had a kid DM me from Australia yesterday, and he was like, oh, I have a band in Australia. I'm really into like no wave, and like my dream is to have James Murphy produce my record. And I'm like, cool. And I just started like sending him stuff to check out. I was like, cool, like read this book, listen to this song, like check this out. Have you heard this? Like, because that's what's really kind of what's about. And that's what my favorite artists always did, was it was more like, I mean, LCD Sound System has done a fantastic job of that. I mean, Rapture less so, because I've been off working on other things like mental health. And, also James just kind of made a blueprint for a lot of kids. Like, here's krautrock, or like, even the song Losing My Edge, it's kind of just like, here's a list of stuff. Like you could just take Losing My Edge and base your entire life on everything he mentions in that song, and that's kind of like, I feel like that's sort of a big part of music for me. But that's also like a very British idea, I think, that, at least for me, like that kind of, like he made Losing My Edge like very consciously for British music press, the same way that Kanye West at some point figured out that he wanted to have a #1 album in Pitchfork. So he just hired all these interns to figure out what Pitchfork liked. And then he had a #1 album in Pitchfork. Or, Daft Punk wanted to win a Grammy. So their last record, they like moved to LA and they got all of these people that the Grammys like the guy from Chic. And then they like, they built a whole mythology about having a house in LA, and like they did all this stuff, and then they won a Grammy. So it sounds a bit boring, really. Like, it's just, it's a very scholarly approach to, musical domination or whatever, but that's just kind of how I was trained, like it's it's a dogfight of ideas and culture and stuff like that. But Brits love that stuff. British people are like all in on that kind of stuff. There's like music journalists, that's like all they talk about, And
I was reading on NME today, like just going through old articles about the Rapture, and it's talking about the NME Awards in 2004, and it said that you were doing the securities heading because I think you crowd surfed 4 times in a row or something at one gig.
I had what? Oh, crowd surfed. Oh yeah, like I was just really into the G's, like I mentioned GS Lizard and Fugazi before, but crowd surfing was like, I don't know, it was just something that I didn't believe that I could do, I mean, just to get to the point of doing gigs where people will carry you around. I was just like totally fascinated by it. You know what I mean? It was just like, I don't know. I mean, at some point I kind of got bored of it, because there's only so much crowd surfing you can do. Like, but yeah, there's a lyric by The Fall that I always return to, and he starts off this song on Hex Education Hour by saying, by when what used to excite you does not, like you've used up all your allowance of experiences. And I've returned to that so many times, like where it's like, there's only so much, like you don't realize it when you find something new and exciting. You just think like, this is going to last forever. I'm going to always, this is great. I love this. And then, I mean, that's why I don't have any tattoos, because it's like, I'm not sure I'm going to be super into that when I'm 60 or whatever, you know, and I don't know if I want to have to turn it into something that I like then or whatever. So not that I'm against tattoos. I love tattoos and I like people that have tattoos and I like the meaning that they have, but I just change like so often. But, you know, at that time, crowd surfing was like, it was wonderful. And, you know, it was also very like 90s, like people were, in my generation, people didn't crowd surf that much, but like in the 90s, when I first started going to shows, like lots of people did that. Like Nirvana was jumping in the audience. I used to jump into the drum kit all the time too, because the Who did that and Nirvana did that and stuff. But then, you know, Vito, the drummer, was just like, one day he was just like, never jump into my drums again. And I was like, all right, I guess that's cool. Like, and then, but that didn't stop me from crowd surfing. And I'm sure, yeah, the bouncers are just, they fucking hated it. You know what I mean? What, you know, it just makes their job like a lot harder, really.
Yeah. It sounded like you had quite a good relationship with the other bands on that tour. Was it Franz Ferdinand, Funeral for a Friend? Kind of, it talked about you all being on stage for the last song of the night.
Yeah, I mean, we're all just young, naive idiots. And, you know, our merch girl at the time, this girl, her name was Storm. And she like married one of the guys in Funeral for a Friend, like on the tour or something. It was like, you know, and it's a bit of like Stockholm syndrome. And also just, you know, I think the Von Bondies were there, and that was right after Jack White had like punched that dude in the face. And that was like a big NME story, right? It was like, you know, guy from like pictures of his kind of bludgeoned face or whatever. But yeah, I mean, you know, Franz Ferdinand would probably talk to them more than anybody else, and they remember it fondly. But I mean, NME Tour is just like, I don't know, it's just like one of those things where it's like the first time you play Glastonbury or Reading or Leeds or these things that like I read about, I heard about, I've seen video of it, and then it just felt, and then also like the people at that show, those shows were really young. And that was the first time I'd ever played for a really young audience, like 15, 14-year-olds and stuff like that. Because the Rapture is kind of like, I have this theory that, you know, most music is either for, pop music is either for 14-year-olds or 20-year-olds. And it kind of swings back in the pendulum, like sometimes depending on history. And the pendulum swings faster now. And, you know, the way we consume information is different. But for a long time, that's how it was. And the Rapture is like, pretty heady, you know, and it's like it's there's a lot coming at you, and it's complex, and it's emotional in a way that's, you know, more like something a 20-year-old would relate to than a 14-year-old. And not that 14-year-olds can't relate to it, but it's not, you know, Britney Spears, or, you know, it's not like just pure lowest common denominator pop music. And but yeah, that NME tour, I just remember there's like really young kids, and that felt like really exciting to me, because it was kind of felt like for all of us, you know, like Franz Ferdinand started playing at art college or whatever they did, you know, like they're kind of more like us. Like we were all worked at record stores and, you know, kind of had already been to university, and we were like at a different level and a mentality, and like our early shows were not for 14-year-olds. So it was like the first time we had, and Funeral for a Friend was kind of like, they didn't really fit in on that tour, because they were kind of, their main audience was like weird emo kids with hair in their face and like streaks of purple or whatever, you know, like, and funny arm bracelets and spiky drop stuff like that. So like, you know, I think after that they went on tour with Iron Maiden, something like that, you know, but like they didn't really fit in. And then there's like the Von Bondies, who are less arty, I would say, like kind of, you know, more from, that was back when there was two streams. Back in those days, it was kind of like, there's always bands like, you know, the Mooney Suzuki and like, you know, the rock, like the Vines, or like, you know, there are people that were just like rock and roll, like, but like in a really, like they didn't have very broad record collections. Like they were just into like guitar rock. And then you had like the kind of art kids, and we were in like the art kids category. So it's sort of like us and France, and the Von Bondies, who were kind of, I remember the Von Bondies had 2 girls in their band, and it was just nice to have girls on tour. You know, it's like there's like a million dudes all the time. And like that's something that recently I've been enjoying more, is like being in bands with women and just being working with women and stuff like that, because you know, music is just such like a dude festival, or it has been for so long, and it's hopefully will change more over time. I mean, it seems like music isn't about guitars anymore. It's about, you know, computers and one person and Instagram and stuff. It's hard to be a band on Instagram, but yeah, I mean, that was a really interesting tour for sure. It definitely helped me stop drinking though, because I remember on that tour, on the NME tour, we were on a tour bus, and it was one of the first times I ever been in a tour bus. And I remember we played in Cardiff, and I went out that night and I just got like really hammered, and we were DJing the night after the show with Franz Ferdinand somewhere in some club, and we went there, and I remember they just kept bringing us drinks, and I forgot to eat dinner, and I almost like didn't make it home. I remember I was in the middle of DJing, and I had that feeling where you just go, like you drink too much, and then you just go like, I have about like half an hour before I can't move. Like I just, you know, like I'm crossing over into another realm. And like, so I just went to the promoter and I was like, just put me in a fucking car and take me back to the bus. And he was like, fine, you know, and I did that. And I woke up the next day and I was supposed to talk to my wife, who was in New York, and I had this like kind of phone appointment with her, and I woke up like 2 hours after I was supposed to talk to her, and my adrenaline kicked in, and I was like, fuck, like I missed talking to my wife. And I finally got myself sober enough to like call her, and I called her really hungover from the back of the bus, and she said, she was really upset, and she said, yeah, I tried to call you because, you know, you were late, and 2 girls picked up your phone, and when I said, was Luke there, they just like laughed and hung up the phone. And I was like, fuck, man, like I am just like the worst. I am the worst. Like I am a terrible fucking person. And, you know, it really kind of got me thinking. I was like, what if she did that to me? Like, how would I feel about that? Would I like, and I just was like, I would just be fucking destroyed. I would just be really sad, like, you know? And so I started thinking about it.
What year did you get married?
I got married in 2001. Oh, okay. So, you know, we had already been married for a while, and all of our friends were like the guy that gave the speech at my wedding was like a session drummer for Yes. Right. He was, yeah, like I once had dinner with Yes, and it was really nice because my wife used to hang out with these weird drug addicts, and one of them was a session drummer for Yes, and he had like a beard with a rubber band in it, you know? That kind of thing. And he had an overcoat, and he gave the speech at my wedding. Vito was supposed to give the speech at my wedding, but before he could, the session drummer for Yes grabbed like the microphone at my wedding, which was at Plant Bar. The reception was at Plant Bar.
All right.
And he was like, told everybody there that I was going to cheat on my wife because I was a musician and it was only a matter of time. That was his wedding speech. Like, wow. You know, congrats guys, you know, he just got married. So like, all my wife's friends were telling her, like, you know, your husband is, you know, with a mountain of blow and like a lot of strippers, you know, every night, which is not really indie rock reality. That's not like Franz Ferdinand doesn't hang out with strippers and do cocaine. That's not their vibe. You know what I mean? But it's like, if you're not really that clued into music, you might think that was, you know, that everybody is like Motley Crue in the 80s or something, but it wasn't. But like that was kind of the mythology that was being pushed at her, and she knew that wasn't true. So, you know, after that, what happened was she quit her job, and we went on tour with The Cure, and she just went on tour with me for a year, and she, you know, would just kind of like hang out at catering. Like one time I left her with friends for the night, Glastonbury, and they were nice to her and stuff like that. But like that was not the best time. That was a different time. But you know, or like, you know, we're on tour with The Cure, and we went around Europe and did all these stuff. And, you know, that was kind of saved our relationship because I was able to kind of just, you know, show her that being in a band is mostly about sitting in airports or waiting for like a van to pick you up or like doing sound check and then waiting 5 hours and then trying to sleep, or like what, you know, it's like, it's not, I mean, you can turn it into like a nonstop party, but you know, you're probably not going to last very long if you're doing that every night or even regularly.
I suppose it's cool that she kind of experienced the success with you, kind of thing. Like she went through it with you, kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it was also just really meaningful for me to like. It really confirmed a lot of my ideas about the bullshit, and like, there's so much fantasy on the road, and to have someone that you really love and care about. Like, she didn't really have to say anything. She wasn't like, oh, this is stupid, or this matters and this doesn't matter. But I think having somebody completely detached from it, who isn't like a performer, who's just kind of hanging out and cares about you along for the ride, really did a lot of good for my own understanding of what was actually happening. And that wasn't necessarily bad. I mean, it's still like totally awesome. Like, I really miss performing. Like, you know, that's one thing from the pandemic that a real takeaway is like, I just miss playing. I didn't really know if I would, you know, I was like, but I really miss it. But so I'm not trying to say that everything sucks and that rock and roll is terrible and you should never do drugs or whatever. I mean, it's super fun to get plastered and, you know, make out with people that I don't know, or, you know, just be young and dumb. Like, I'm not anti young and dumb. It's kind of like, there comes a time when, you know, you've used up all your allowance of experiences.
And just kind of skipping back to DFA and stuff, your manager at the time, he described himself as enemy number one to DFA. Did that kind of make things a bit more difficult for you, or not really?
Once again, I just think that that's kind of a better story than the truth.
Right, yeah.
But, you know, I don't know. I mean, it's weird. You know, it's weird when you go to war with your family. It really was like a divorce, you know, and we just had a very strange relationship with our manager, period, also, which is a whole, you know, other category of story. But I think we kind of entered in a very like sick time in our career where it was just started to become really about things I didn't care about, which is sort of like, how far can we take this? Like, how many people can we get to listen to us? Like, what's the highest festival placement we can get? You know, it just became about really boring stuff that I didn't start music for, you know, like, and I think DFA kind of became about that for a while. And just, I'm glad that we did all that stuff. And I'm, you know, I'm glad that we were on a major label. I'm glad that we signed a big record contract. I'm glad that we had a really big manager. You know, we are managed by the people who managed U2 and PJ Harvey and us. That was principal management. And they were kind of great for the time. We were signed to Universal Music, which meant that we're in kind of this ecosystem where, you know, Universal Music at the time, it would be like, okay, we're putting out the Rapture record and also the Christina Aguilera, and then, you know, Funeral for a Friend, or like just like really random stuff. And you kind of just needed somebody to advocate for you in a very treacherous situation. But I look at people like I'm friends with Jarvis Cocker, for example, who I met like kind of during that time, like when we were in NME, and like he would just kind of show up to all of our shows, and I wasn't even really a fan of him. I just knew that he was this guy who wrote sort of poetic lyrics that girls were into, which is not necessarily a bad thing at all, you know, but like at the time it was just kind of like, it wasn't really what I was into. But, you know, hanging out with him and sort of like, he still has the same manager that he had in Pulp, and like he's had such a cool career as kind of like the TV for just done like lots of different things. And, you know, his relationship with Rough Trade was really, I think, the relationship we were looking to have with DFA, where it's kind of like, and I think DFA was trying to be kind of like a big British indie in that sense. I mean, Rough Trade went through their own, there's a really good BBC Rough Trade documentary, but like they went through their own rough patch where like they kind of lost the company for a while. They had like a heyday and then they kind of gotten it back together best they can now. But yeah, I mean, consistency is it's a really hard thing to find. I think DFA was trying to take care of us the best they could. And then we got this management and they were trying to take care of us the best they could, but their goals were like very different, you know, like DFA wanted to promote DFA and like kind of the aesthetic that the plant bar aesthetic, if you will, like across the world. And our management just wanted to make us the biggest band in the world, which is not necessarily like the same thing. And I think we ultimately weren't very successful working with our management company because we were always questioning everything that they wanted to do. Like, you know, it's not that we should have stayed with DFA because, you know, like DFA is currently like in a big legal battle, you know what I mean? It's still like a fucking mess. And like, there's all this shit going on, but like, you know, and maybe we'll always go on, who knows? But like, it's not like if we would have stayed with DFA, it's not necessarily wouldn't have been better, but I don't know. I mean, also DFA, like, I don't know if we can ever really leave DFA. Like we went and we put out our last record on DFA and there was a middle record that was in Universal and the first record was on DFA. But, you know, once you do, you know, House of Jealous Lovers is like the first record on DFA and made all of us famous in an indie way. Like, you know, I'm not like famous. Like nobody knows who I am. Like if you went out in New York and you asked like 100 random people on the street, who's Luke Jenner or what is the Rapture or even what is House of Jealous Lovers, they would be like, I don't know. Like, you know, but, you know, within a certain circle, it's like, we're like indie famous, I guess. And, you know, DFA is similar. You know, James Murphy, a lot, if you asked 100 people on the street who LCD Sound System was, you'd get some responses, but you know, they kind of crossed over in a different way in America, and in New York in particular. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think we could ever really leave DFA. Like, I don't think, like, once we're sort of burned into the DNA of, like, House of Jealous Lovers is the first record on DFA. And, you know, Echoes is the first LP on DFA. And, like, it's sort of like, you can't really, like, remove us from the story. So in a way, like we took a detour through major labels and management and stuff, and then kind of, I don't know really where we are now. I mean, more will be revealed later, or nothing will happen, you know, and but it kind of doesn't really matter. Like I feel very much pretty satisfied and feel like everything just happened how it was supposed to happen. And, you know, like James really wanted to be like a big artist. So he went off and he became like a really big artist. And like, that's fucking awesome. You know what I mean? And like, I really wanted to make a record like House of Jealous Lovers and that, you know, would have some sort of minor footnote historical significance for people that work at record stores. And like that happened. And like, you know, I also wanted to have a successful family and be a father, like really be a father. I remember when my kid was 5 years old, I was walking him home from school and he stopped me at the end of our block and he looked up at me and he said, and this just came out of nowhere and it just kind of blew me away. He was like, Dad, he was like, when I was younger, I knew that I had a dad who was in a band, who was a musician who was like traveling around, but like, I didn't really know who that guy was. And he said, I feel like I know you now. I was just like, whoa, that's like so heavy, you know? But he just said it in a way like a 5-year-old would say it, like very matter of factly. And I was like, okay, cool. Like so I made the right choice. And you know, my wife, when I went to go see LCD Sound System play at Madison Square Garden, I came back and I was sat at the table with my wife and I told her, if I would have kept drinking and doing drugs, like I could have easily pulled off playing Madison Square Garden, just like the show I saw tonight. And she just started crying. She wept because she was like, that's true, you know? And I was like, I chose you instead. And I feel very good about that.
confused, but is Echoes, would you say that's your first album?
I mean, technically, yes. I mean, there's 2 EPs before that. There's this weird, pink and black record that's like on Gravity Records that is a very tiny label that I was really into when I was like younger in the West Coast. And then there's this kind of Sub Pop EP which has like a yellow map on it. And then, but Echoes is the first like LP, So I mean, I always refer to it as like the first record, but it's not necessarily the first record. I mean, like the difference between an EP and a record is, 4 songs or whatever. So I guess, like there was a very much like a statement of intent on each of the EPs, and they were pretty spread out pretty far apart. It's not like, sometimes, particularly in the UK, like people put out EPs before their first record, but it's only like a couple months before or something. This is like years in between.
So just moving on to the second album, let's call it, Pieces of the People We Love. Obviously a change of producer and everything, Paul Epworth and Danger Mouse. What was it like working with those guys?
Paul Epworth was our second sound guy. So when James left to, do more DFA stuff, Paul like kind of took over, and he was always saying that he wanted us to get him in with DFA. He was like, I just want to be an intern at DFA and like kind of work in the studio and stuff like that, before he became like a mega producer. And now he, produced, like he did the Adele, he wrote some of those like Adele songs, and like he just became like a completely different person. And like then he was like producing Paul McCartney and doing all the stuff, that people do after they're really successful. And then he like built a studio in like a church. I don't know if you've seen it, but it's totally insane. It's like, and yeah, I mean, it's just, I think, at that time, so there's Paul Epworth, Ewan Pearson is like this other guy who was involved producing the record, and Danger Mouse. Paul Epworth, he was like our sound guy for a long time, and our tour manager, and kind of like he took over for James. We were once playing a show at this London venue called Scala, and we were playing a particular song, and he turned up the bass so loud at the sound desk that someone got really mad at him, and they turned around and threw a full can of beer at him and like hit him in the head, like while he was like doing the mix or whatever. And they were like, turn the fucking bass down, it was so mad. But he, working with him was cool. I think he was complaining. I think we didn't take him seriously enough while we were making that record. I was coming out of a big breakup with James, and I didn't sort of give him the wiggle room that he deserved. He was always like, he felt like he could have done better with that record or something like that. Also, it's just a weird time. Like the record was also like mixed by this guy. Can't remember. He's just like a huge mixer. Tony, really nice guy, but it was kind of like, I think that was like our big, sort of crossover attempt, and it sort of worked. It made us like really popular in Australia. That's when I think about that record, I'm like, oh, that's when we got like really popular in Australia and other places. And we kind of became more of like international band. Like that record kind of had an impact in funny places like South America, and, Echoes was really about New York and England, particularly England. And parts of Europe, like France and stuff like that. The next record really like spread us out all over the world. Also, like touring became like kind of shitty at that point. Like it stopped being really fun and exciting and started to become a bit like, I mean, also like we started to take on, like we had like really gnarly tour crew at that point. Like there was a lot of drugs coming around. Like I was never really super into hard drugs, but I remember being on the tour bus and coming out and just, like our road crews just been up all night doing cocaine and stuff like that, and just being like, this is like fucking disgusting. Like this is not, like I just don't, like the environment started to be creepy. Like we are separated from DFA, so we kind of had lost a feeling. I felt very numb during that time. Like there's a song on that record called Get Myself Into It, where it's like, it's kind of like, if you listen to the lyrics, it's like about faking it. It's really about like trying to get yourself up for a show, like even if you don't want to play a show. House of Jealous Lovers is like I'm going to kick your fucking door down because you're not paying attention to me. Get myself into it is really like, okay, I guess like I got to do this and I'm going to give it my best shot. But at the end of the day, I don't really know how I'm feeling about it. So it's kind of like, it's weird because in a way, like the wheels were coming off, but as you're kind of reaching your peak at the same time. And a lot of people like really love that record. For me, it's my least favorite one, but mostly because my personal experience at the time was so shit, it was like fucking terrible. On a personal level, it was like maybe one of the worst times of my life, besides like junior high. It was maybe like the second coming of junior high.
Right.
Emotionally.
Yeah, I know what you mean, yeah. Yeah, I really love the sound on Gotta Get Myself Into It. Just really, I'd love to hear it like full blast in the club, I think.
Yeah, it's cool. I mean, a lot of that is like Ewan Pearson, who nobody really talks about, but I don't know if you know who Ewan Pearson is, but it's kind of like he's like a dance music guy. He's like lives in Berlin these days, but he's from the UK and he, his name's Ewan, so it's got to be from the UK, but it's like, he did a lot of kind of like programming and stuff on that. That record is way more produced than Echoes in a way. Like it's a lot more saturated and kind of bigger sounding. Like Echoes has a very consciously so like very like kind of sharp sound to it. There's a lot of space in it, and it's meant to be that way. And Pieces of People We Love is a lot more dense, and also just has like tons of like Get Myself Into It, for example, just has like a lot of extra touches. Like if you listen to it on headphones or if you listen to it in a club, you can hear like so many different little things like backwards reverbs and kind of production-y. Like it's a much more produced record in a way. Yeah.
And I just wanted to ask about songwriting. Like, we've had people who say, they never felt the pressure after they got signed and the success came. We've had people who said the pressure definitely changed and they always felt under pressure to be more commercially successful. How did you find it in terms of songwriting?
Well, I mean, I think, Pieces of People We Love is a perfect example of that. Those are songs written under pressure. Get Myself Into It is a song written under pressure, and all those songs are under pressure. And, you were asking about, did you know House of Jealous Lovers was going to be big? It was like, no. But like once you do something I think that record for me was really confusing because it was like, how do we just get House of Jealous Lovers to happen again? And it started to feel a bit like you're flogging it a bit, or it just felt. But I think that's an interesting result too. I think you can get interesting results being under pressure and stuff like that. But songwriting under pressure or with a lot of money involved, like, I don't know, it just doesn't make any sense, or it's different, or I mean, I think, but that's cool. Like in a way, like I feel like I got to live out sort of like I'm obsessed with the 70s, in music as a decade. And like that was when the major labels first kicked in, and you had like Asylum Records and sort of like Reprise, like it's like LA. That's when like the LA kind of thing happened, like when people started recording records in LA, and there's these big budgets, and that kind of got completely played out by the time you had like Fleetwood Mac and stuff. But like that was as close to the Rapture getting to Fleetwood Mac as you could get, just sort of like there's drugs around and there's a lot of songwriting pressure. The record label is like really excited about having like the hot band, and they're like, can't wait to hear your new songs, dudes, like thumbs up, and it's like, I don't like these fucking people, like I don't want to perform for them, or I think that's like the thing that I learned through that experience is like, you can't write for making hits or being having abstract. I used to really want 14-year-olds to be into me, but like you can't write for 14-year-olds if you're in your 20s. You have to write for 20-year-olds, and you have to write for your own experience and for what matters to you, regardless of if that like sort of fits in with anything or not. And I learned that during that time.
And I wanted to ask you about the song No Sex with Ben, because I've read that Justin Timberlake sang on it originally. Is that correct?
Yeah, I mean, like Timberland produced that record. So we recorded that song for Grand Theft Auto soundtrack, and we did it at in London at the studio that was owned by the guy from The Art of Noise. And we were going to do a Timberland, and Timberland was also producing Justin Timberlake in the next room. And he kind of came over, and also Duran Duran was there for some fucking weird reason. So like, yeah, we were like, while we were recording that song, like it was us, Duran Duran, and Justin Timberlake in like a control room listening to that, which is just so fucking strange. And No Sex for Ben was about our friend Ben Reimer, who was in this band called the Fat Truckers. So, and it was like basically a piss take on him. And, he was like super bummed out about it. And that is a song that became like normal Australian people know that song, which is really weird. Like I remember that was a song that made us like, the Rapture made all of its money in Australia for years, and we just were there all the time. And it was because of that song, No Sex for Ben, because it was on, they have, I think it's called Triple J. It's like, just like the big radio station. And it was like, the top 5 songs of the year. So like people I know in Australia are like, I just never want to fucking hear that song again. And I remember, at a certain time, like I would get recognized in hotels by like dads coming back from the pool with like their kids and stuff like that in Australia, because it was just like, we were just everywhere. And we were like headlining like huge festivals. Like one New Year's we played on the side of a mountain for like 100,000 people. And like, it's just like fucking weird, and that's kind of one of the beauty about being an international band, is that, things happen in different territories in different ways. Like, and that was always a dream of mine. Like I, studying music history, like the Ramones were really big in Argentina at some point, like Beatles big, like couldn't leave the hotel room. And they like, they would go to Argentina once a year and play for like a stadium, and then everywhere else they'd play club shows for like 500 people, And I always thought that was like super cool. Like, and, but we kind of got to live that through this one stupid song about our friend Ben Reimer.
Yeah, I read that you said the song kept the band alive for 5 years. Is that right?
We would have been able to make a living anyway, but it was just like, it made us very comfortable and kind of just took care of any worries we had. Like the British are very fickle and like to destroy things, particularly in the music press. So it's like, we like at some point, like we were the biggest band in England, or one of them. So like, there was one year in the NME where the album of the year was the White Stripes record with Seven Nation Army on it, and the runner-up to that was Echoes, and then that year in Pitchfork, we were the #1 record of the year. So it's kind of like, but, when Pieces of People We Love happened, like we were kind of around in the British music press, but it was like we weren't at the same level that we were before. And but in other territories we were like, in Australia, it was like all of a sudden it was like, now you're really popular in Australia. And it wasn't even Pieces of the People We Love. It was No Sex for Ben, which was just this like song. I don't even know if it ever made it on like a CD or anything. Like, I don't know. I guess they just picked it up, or maybe it was when digital downloads were starting, or I don't really know how it worked. But like, yeah, I mean, it's just funny how things happen. Like, you can't really predict that. It's like, oh yeah, you're going to, have you're going to do a song for a video game soundtrack, and then that's going to be super popular in Australia. It's like, okay, cool. I guess that's cool. Like, but you can't really map that out per se.
And I don't know if it's just Wikipedia talk, but I read that Vito wasn't a big fan of that song. Is that right?
Well, it's because it was like making fun of our friends. And it was like, our friend was like sad about it. He was like, I like bums me out that you guys wrote this song about how much of an asshole I am and how I'm never going to have sex again, And so like Vito has like a really big heart, and he's just like a really warm personality. And like, he's the kind of guy who's just friends with everybody. And like, when we would go on tour, like he would always make friends with the bus driver, and he would like sit up with the bus driver and talk to the bus driver for 5 hours and like get really close. And you know what I mean? He's like that kind of guy. So like, you know, he's not going to react favorably to writing a song that could be perceived negatively against somebody who you're friends with.
And then, yeah, like a 5-year gap in between second and third albums, and both you and Matt left the band. Obviously, you returned, but can you describe that time for us?
Well, that was when I was first starting to get sober, and like, you know, that was my mom killed herself, and I was like, being on tour isn't making me feel better. Crowd surfing is no longer satiating me as it used to. And we had already done so much. I mean, we went on tour with Daft Punk. We had toured with The Cure. The Cure is like my favorite band, you know. So we met David Bowie because David Bowie called up one day and was like, "I'd like to meet you." And then, you know, was like, "I listen to your music when I'm like in my car and doing my laundry and stuff." So it's just like, all right, like, you know, we had already played Coachella a bunch of times. We played Glastonbury. We've done everything. You know, we went on NME tour, and like, it was just like, what else are we supposed to fucking do? And like, who are we going to meet, and how much validation do you want? And by then I had money in the bank, you know, and like, not a lot, but like enough that I didn't have to worry about it, you know, probably because of Australia or whatever. And I was just like, you know, like, and I had just had a kid, and I had been married for years, but I felt like I wasn't really the kind of partner that I wanted to be, that I would want to have. Like, I wasn't living up to my own sort of standards or what I wanted to be as a person, just on a real basic level. Not like I was performing well. I was really good at crowd surfing. I was like super good at screaming into microphones and jumping up and down, but like that wasn't, I just felt like that wasn't it. Like there was got to be more than that. And, you know, I was a philosophy major in college, and my mom was like a art therapist, and she is a very like reflective person. My father is a very reflective person. Like, you know, he wakes up every day, smokes a joint, goes for a walk on the beach, you know, and like he spends a lot of time by himself, and he's very like intellectual and kind of philosophical. Is really into like culture, and you know, he's a business management professor, but he's really interested in cultures and like how culture is created and what, you know, all that kind of stuff. So, you know, I just felt like my life had gotten very narrow, and that what had started off as a very expansive practice of touring the world, meeting new people, eating food, staying in fancy hotels and getting driven around by people and stuff like that. And, you know, having a tour manager hand me hotel room key and make sure that I get on the plane correctly, and being treated like a child, which was fucking great. You know, I loved all that stuff. Like never worrying about anything. Like there is a person who will make sure that you get all of your needs met all day long. Like that was great. You know, but it also was a bit of a straitjacket, and I forgot how to take care of myself, and I wasn't very useful when I came home, because like my wife was like, "Cool, let's have a relationship now." And I'm like, "Cool, did you talk to the tour manager? Like, is he here? Like, you know, is the tour manager going to take care of my kid? Like, can he do that?" You know? So I just felt like it was more important. And I really disappointed a lot of people by pulling out of this like gigantic machine that was making a lot of money, that was very successful, and more importantly was about to make a lot more money. Like, you know, we were almost at the point where we were going to start pulling in a lot of money. And I just felt like, you know what, like I don't know who I am. Like, I don't even know if I like myself. I probably, if I'm honest with myself, like I don't like myself. I've met a lot of my heroes. I don't think they really like themselves. I don't really want to continue on this path. Like, I don't want to be a 50-year-old man and still have never grown up and have missed my responsibility to my son, and you know, because I didn't know any musicians that were good fathers. Like I didn't know any musicians who were good partners to their significant others, or knew how to have a relationship. And I was like, you know what? Like I have enough money, and more importantly, like I've achieved enough acclaim. Like my favorite singer and songwriter took me on tour and told me I was great every night, and we ate pizza together, and like he watched me perform, and I don't need like more of that. What I need is to like myself, and I like really fucking hate myself. And so like I'm going to just start, I got to figure that out. And once I figure that out, then I can start playing music again, or then I can sort of pass that on to somebody else, because you know, like there wasn't a person for me that was able to really sum that up, or to kind of give me a path for that, or you know, affirm me in a different way than was like good show dude, or nice song, or good record, or whatever, you know, like that. It's not enough to make a good record, well, not for me. Like it just, that was my goal up until that point, but it still doesn't feel like enough. And I have everything that I want now. It's like I achieved all of those things, but I was actually quite busy in those 5 years, I guess, is the long answer, or the short answer to that.
Yeah. So then going into the third album, but yeah, what kind of changed for you where you wanted to, you know, you wanted to get back into writing and releasing the album again?
I think wanting to see Vito again. And yeah, the Rapture really comes down to that for me. It's just wanting to see Vito, because Vito is like, you know, Vito is somebody who works, you know, like during those times when I wasn't around doing the Rapture, Vito's like working every day, and he's doing stuff. Like, you know, Vito doesn't take any days off. Like he works, you know, and he's either working with you or working with somebody else. James Murphy's a bit like that too. Like, you know, he's just, if you're working with him, you're going to talk to him. And if you're not, you're probably not going to talk to him that much. So I just want to see Vito again. And that record was the first attempt to really start writing songs that were like of service, or from a different approach, that were like less fear-based. I just started listening to a lot of music that was like kind of like spiritual and religious music. I mean, it's almost like a gospel record. You know what I mean? It's like, you know, In the Grace of Your Love's like, you know, it's like I was also like really into 12 steps at the time. I don't know if you know much about that, but the classic ones, like kind of like AA, and then there's a million other ones. I got into a bunch of different therapy modalities and stuff. It's really kind of like a healing record, you know, like it's kind of a bookend too. And it felt like a conclusion in a lot of ways, because, you know, Echoes is very much a record that's just like, I mean, there is healing elements in it, but House of Jealous Lovers is just like shrapnel. And I felt like In the Grace of Your Love, then you got this like middle awkward period where nothing really makes sense. And then In the Grace of Your Love is kind of like a first attempt at really trying to implement some of the healing stuff, or try to make the process better. I think it's like before that, it was really about the results. It was like, I don't care how you feel while you're making this record. It's just make a record, you know, make the best record you can, however you can. And In the Grace of Your Love was really like, you know, and if you listen to that record, it's really feels like that. It's a lot warmer. We also worked with this guy, Philippe Sadar, who's like died not that long ago, but he was a real mentor to me in terms of like how to include my family as an artist, and, you know, just how to live a life as an artist, but just a very warm person. And the intent of making that record was kind of to bring out maybe some of the warm aspects of the Rapture. Like I was saying, you know, Vito is like a very warm person. I can be a warm person. I think I'm a lot more warm than I was during House of Jealous Lovers era. So yeah, but I mean, I think it's kind of a demarcation where it's like, all right, let's start living a process-oriented life rather than a results-based path.
And then, yeah, obviously split up again in 2014. And I was reading a quote from Gabriel, I think, who said, you know, that you got to a point where you weren't talking to each other after gigs, and that you would kind of leave the stage before they did, kind of thing, while they were still playing. Is that true?
Yeah, I mean, well, because I remember there was a point in Grace Your Love tour where I just started, because I was kind of sober and dealing with a lot of emotional stuff that was underneath like all the drinking and stuff like that. I had just, I had pretty heavily I started having memories of being like sexually abused as a child, in a pretty extreme, brutal way. And I expressed that to the tour crew and the band. I was just like, look, like there was a point at which we were on tour with the Rapture during that, and Gabe was making like a really explicit sexual joke. We were in France, like going to a festival, and he was making this like really nasty joke, a sexual joke. And I was like, just having these memories come up of being abused as a kid. And I asked him, we were in this very long van ride, and I said to him, like, look, like, I'm having a really hard time. Like, I'm just having these like horrible memories come up for me. And, this joke that you're telling right now it's painful for me. And, you can tell that joke when I'm not around, but like, I'm trapped in this van with you, and like, I literally can't leave. So can you just put that on pause for the next 2 hours? And he was just like, fuck you. Like, you don't get to tell me what to do. Like, I'm going to say whatever I want to say. You're not the boss of me. And I was just like, okay, man, like, like, I don't really know what to say to you. Like, okay, like, I hear that I'm not the boss of you. And so there was a time on that tour for, the next few weeks or whatever, where it was tight, it was tense. And I just was like, if these guys aren't going to respect me, like, I can't really like hang out with them. And I just have to get to a place where I feel like I can breathe and I can sort of heal this wound that's been exposed that is very painful. And, to be honest, like, I was just really maintaining on tour. Like, it was like, tour is not a good place to deal with emotional wounds. Like, if you're just having sexual abuse memories, like going on tour in Australia or France for 2 weeks and staying in hotel rooms and being sleep deprived and playing in front of large audiences is probably not the most therapeutic environment. Like, it could be okay. And also at that point, like, there was a real split in the band where it was like, just because I wasn't drinking or doing drugs doesn't mean other people weren't doing that stuff. So I felt very lonely in regards to, okay, everyone's going to go out and party afterwards. And like, I don't do that. So like, who am I and what do I do and why am I doing this? And like, it wasn't, when we first started touring, we just go play at someone's house, or we played a small club, and then you just like hang out with the bartender, or you hang out with college radio DJs, or you hang out with whoever comes to the show, and it's fun. And they take you around to a diner, or you sleep at their house, or, you just like hang out. But if you're playing like Melt Festival in Germany and, you're like, you don't even talk to any fans because you just go to the backstage, and then, you're in your tour bus drives in, you wake up in the parking lot, you go to catering, you try to find a place to go to the bathroom. Then you like, a couple hours before the show, you have like a dressing room and it has like a bunch of fruit in it and some drinks. And then you play the show and you try to take a shower and, maybe you have some interviews to do or, whatever, but there's not really, it just doesn't feel, it doesn't feel the same. And people are looking for tour space. That's another thing is like, I could relate to Gabe on some level. It's like, if you're just always in a van with somebody or always traveling and you don't have any space, it's kind of like, it can get to be a bit much. If you're really young and you've never done it before, it just feels very exciting and exhilarating. And it's like, cool, I'm on this adventure. And then if you're just doing that for a year and a half straight with no breaks, we toured a lot on that record. I think we played 120 or 140 shows or something like that on that tour. So like, it was a year and a half. It was just a long time. And by the time we were kind of done with that, it was just like, yeah, I mean, I think naturally you're just kind of like, fuck you guys. Like, you know, it's not that I don't like you. I just don't want to see you for a while, you know, but I think time can heal those things. And, you know, I'm not in like a super raw space. I was, and I couldn't have anticipated it. Like, I didn't know those memories were going to come up. Like, to be honest with you, I thought I was kind of like done with my healing. I felt like, okay, I've been sober for a while, and, you know, I've written this record that's really positive, and that it's kind of like life affirming record. And, you know, I've made a lot of peace with like my past and stuff. And then it was just like, you are not done, my friend. There is like a whole another level of stuff that you haven't touched yet that you are now going to be confronted with. I mean, that's really what doing, and that's how I kind of became a life coach and, you know, did that stuff, because it was like, I'd been through so many layers of stuff and like, you know, had to deal with so much of my own personal trauma and layers of, you know, just, you know, and part of that is like you help people after a while. It's like, you know, Gabe doesn't want to talk to me about what happened to him when he was a kid, or Vito doesn't really, you know, but like somebody else does. And, you know, maybe even another musician or maybe another artist. And for me, it's a very healing thing to do, and part of my practice to kind of be like, because if I could have talked to me in 2012, like I could have done myself a lot of good. You know what I mean? Like maybe the band wouldn't even broke up, like if, or whatever, like if I could have just had even just several conversations with myself, you know, my past self, I probably could have sorted myself out in a way, you know?
It's kind of a 6-year gap before you reunited last year. And I've like been checking out the music you were putting out, like Meditation Tomorrow. I thought was really cool. I was enjoying that. And then, yeah, like CD Films that I mentioned earlier. We're actually playing drums in that band.
Yeah, I mean, it's just, you know, I'm at the point in my career where I just do whatever I want all the time, you know, and I learned that from David Byrne going on tour. I was in this project called the William Onyeabor Project. I don't know if you ever checked that out, but it's just kind of like African musician guy. And it was just like so much fun, and like hang out with David Byrne. And like David Byrne just does whatever he wants to do, you know, like all the time. And that's what I do. I just do what I want to do all the time, like whether or not someone tells me it's a bad idea or not, you know? And because why not, you know? And I'm not at the point in my life where I feel like anyone can really take away anything from me. And I'm fairly confident that I can make enough money to be in a position to continue to do what I want to do. So I'm going to do whatever I want to do all the time. I think that's, you know, that's all any artist can really hope for. That's the best thing. You know, if you have sort of success at some point, great. But, you know, art's a very personal thing. Like a very important concept for me is that success and failure are personal. Like nobody can decide if you're successful or not, and no one can decide if you're a failure or not. And if you can really embody that idea and live according to that, like you're free forever, and no one can mess with you ever again. You know, like you're just like good.
And then obviously, like I mentioned, you reformed in 2019 again.
You know, I just want to see Vito again. Like we actually went to therapy for a couple of years. That was actually how I kind of became a life coach, is we went to go see this woman who was a life coach, and she's like a mediator. She wrote this book called Working With You Is Killing Me. And I think Gabe found her, and she, you know, she's cool. And we went and saw her for a couple of years and kind of just like talked about stuff enough. You know, I think for me, like the Rapture doesn't really break up or reunite, because like I started the Rapture, and, you know, it was just a excuse to hang out with Vito. And, you know, like I'm always going to love Vito, and I'm going to want to see Vito. And as long as whatever we're doing together, that's the Rapture. Or, you know, even just, you know, writing songs and stuff. I just wrote all these songs when I was 22, and that was the Rapture. And then like, I just was kind of like, hey, Vito, you know, he was in some other bands and trying to do this like film thing. And I just kind of got him into it, and then, you know, booked a tour and stuff like that. So I guess, you know, playing shows is just like, I know Vito will go to that. So that's what I do. So, you know, like play some shows.
Yeah, yeah, good idea. And then I was really enjoying, is it an album you released this year called One?
Yeah.
Really
That's
enjoying
kind
a song called You're Not Alone. I thought it was really beautiful.
Thanks. Yeah. I mean, that's kind of sums up our entire conversation. I mean, just in that one song, right? I mean, it's sort of all of the journey. And I just feel like that's kind of what I have to offer after living in a house of jealous lovers, and, you know, like just kind of being with, I always felt like I wanted to be a part of a generation, like not the best artist of my generation, but like, you know, like be respected and contribute something. But I feel like what I have to give that's unique, that's kind of exemplified by that song, is really telling people that they're not alone. And like, you know, art is such like a lonely place. You know, it's like you get in there with your feelings and you're kind of out on this cliff. You know, if you're crowd surfing or you're performing, you're a singer in a band and you're like out on the stage, you might be surrounded by 100 people or 100,000 people, but like you're alone, you know, like you're really on an island. It's just you and a microphone in the darkness, you know, and people are projecting onto you and living through you, and you're kind of giving up your body and you're giving up everything. But it's just this feeling of like not being alone and being able to convey that to somebody that's in that predicament. I really feel like that's what I was kind of put on earth to do. That's like what makes me unique as compared to my heroes, is like I would have done anything to have one of my heroes show up and tell me I wasn't alone, you know? And when I was trying to get sober, or when I was dealing with sexual abuse or growing up in a traumatic childhood home, or, you know, when my mom committed suicide, if like fucking David Bowie would have came out of the clouds and said like, you know what, like, you know, my mom committed suicide too, and like I was abused as a kid, and I've been trying to get my shit together with my relationship with my wife and trying to be like a better father. Like I would have done anything to have somebody kind of validate me in that way, or just sort of tell me I wasn't alone. Like you're not alone, dude. Like you are okay. And like, you know, you don't have to kind of like figure it all out on your own, and you're not doing anything wrong. Like this is all, it's not normal for most people, but it's normal for you. And like, I understand you, you know? And I feel like the record I just put out, it's like a love letter to my family. And like my son's voice is the first voice on the record, and my wife's voice is the next wife, you know? And, you know, when I first started making music, my wife said to me, she's like, after we got married, she's like, all the Rapture songs are about your mom. And I was like, fuck, like I never thought about it, but it's totally true. And she's like, you should write me a song too. And I was like, okay, yeah, like I'll try to do that. So like, you know, I feel happy to be able to write songs that aren't only about my mom. Like my mom's always in there. But, you know, and also just kind of finish her journey in a lot of ways. Like she was an art therapist. She suffered, she died. She wanted to move to New York, you know, so I did that for her. And, you know, she wanted to heal artists, and like, I want to heal artists. Like, that's my job. That's my job. Like, that's what I'm supposed to do. I'm supposed to like heal artists. And if I have to put out impressive music and to get in the door to be able to do that, then that's great. But like, I feel like I felt a lot of peace recently, understanding that my life is more about mental health, and that music is a part of that quest for balance and peace, and that, you know, and it's an effective tool, and it's saved my life many times. Something I could escape into, but that I no longer have to like escape into music, that music can be bigger than music, or life can be bigger than music, and that, you know, that it can have a context, and in that way, just kind of exploring where that takes you, really. I think and hopefully creating a path, that essentially just trying to be there for myself. Like I said, like if I could have just talked to myself back in the day, like, but I can't really talk to myself in the past, but I can talk to, and I do talk to other people, and I feel like that the last record I just put out is sort of part of putting that intention out to the world. Like, hey, I'm here. You're not alone. If you need to talk to me, you can like DM me or, get in touch, or I can help you get in touch with somebody else who might be able to help you, or whatever it is. Because I feel like, my mom being a suicide, my grandmother being a suicide, and them both being artists, them both being British. I don't know. That's my path. That's where I'm going. I think. I mean, it could all completely change in about 30 seconds, but that feels very much like where I'm supposed to be right now.
Obviously, like live gigs seem quite a long way off now, but would you ever play solo gigs and play that album, do you think?
Yeah, I mean, we did. The last Rapture shows we played in LA, and I performed most of the songs on that record, like opening the Rapture. And then I have another band called Tandem Jump. That's me and this. There's two new members of the Rapture, essentially, and one of them is in CD Films, and the other one is in this band Tandem Jump. Both of which I play drums in, and and just help like support them. It's also just like fun to be like, I already did everything I want to do, so I want to make some other people famous, or get some other people to make their version of House of Jealous Lovers or whatever. It just sounds like fun, like also being a father. It's like having the experience of being there for someone and watching them experience the joy of connection and validation and just feeling like they're empowered feels like so much better than anything that could happen to you. Like I'm really, I think, supposed to be a coach. Like, I always thought I was gonna be a baseball coach, and maybe I'll be a baseball coach one day, but like, yeah, like so Tandem Jump open, CD Films open for the Rapture. Pretty much like anytime the Rapture plays now, I always have like one of my projects like open the show, which is super fun. And, Vito lets me like play his drums. I mean, I'm sure that like this summer we were supposed to be in England and Europe and stuff, doing festivals and playing shows. And I'm sure that, some of my solo project will open, or Tandem Jump or CD Films or whatever it is, when that happens. But also like, I would love to go off and give talks, or like I saw Patti Smith perform recently in a synagogue by my house, and she kind of like, she was promoting a book, and she read from her book, and then she sang some songs, and it was just her and one other dude, and it was just such a nice show. I was like, that was fucking cool. Like, and I think there's a lot, like, if the Rapture obviously pays for everything, right? And my dad's whole thing was like, just figure out how to get people to pay for you to travel. So that's what the Rapture was, achieve that. Cross that off. That's good. But yeah, it's like, the Rapture will get me wherever, and then I can just kind of hang out. Like when the Rapture went to LA, we played a festival, I think in January or last year. And I just like hung out, and then I did some solo stuff, and before the record was out. And then we did some CD Film shows, and then we like recorded some CD Film stuff. And then, like I said, last time in LA, we played, and then, other stuff. So there's just an opportunity to do all those things together, and hopefully along with like I'm doing a podcast about mental health and the music industry, and then also like doing this kind of like life coaching stuff and having my family. Hopefully just like it all kind of balances out, like that's my goal, is to be able to just like do all of that stuff at once. And I really love playing softball, so like I do that whenever I can. So some combination of that sort of stuff would just be like fucking great, if we could just kind of continue to, and it all feels like an extension of that. And I'm hoping that, that those things cross over and sort of are able to live together, hopefully.
What's your podcast called?
It's called All My Love, which is a song on the record I just put out. And also All My Love, the song, is really kind of a statement of intent about what I want like the rest of my life to be about. Like if you listen to the lyrics of All My Love, it's about my family really, but also just trying to surrender to something bigger than myself, and kind of just give into love, really, and kind of, it sounds like what it sounds like. I mean, I guess you can say anything, but it's really about your intention and your action. So just wanting to sort of do the things I talk about rather than, I mean, it's really easy to say the word love or to say you have good intentions, but if you don't like do anything about it, then I guess it's that kind of like faith without works is dead idea, but hopefully, I don't know, hopefully like be the change. Like I try to do social media posts every day these days. And like, the reason I do that is because when I first got on social media, it was like, there's nothing on social media that is what I want it to be like. So I was like, well, what, and that's the best way to start a band or start anything is just like, when the Rapture started, there was no band that sounded like what I wanted music to sound like, not historically, but in my periphery or in America or whatever, in New York. So I was like, all right, like we'll start, like, I'm tired of complaining about music not being how I want it. So I'm just going to make it how I want, and that's a big DFA principle and a big thing that James talks about all the time. It's just like, yeah, like try to make all of your music, but by extension, try to make your life into what you think life should be like. And I think that's like the cool part about art, right? And that's the power of art is it's just like, make it whatever you want. Like stop complaining and just fucking do something. Like, you're right. So trust yourself and just kind of, somebody else will appreciate it. And if they don't, then it doesn't matter because you just made the thing that you needed anyway. The kind of, I like to think about being of service a lot just because it feels really good. Like, but the only safe way to really do service is to do the thing that you need to happen, which is essentially like what a party is, right? Is like, I really need a party. So like, and who do I want to be there? Oh, I want these people to be there, and that's what a show or a band or anything is. So, I mean, if you've been in a band or you've considered being a band, or if you just had a party and had friends around your house, it's like you're being of service and you're doing things that you need to happen, whether that's having a family or, getting drunk with your friends when you're 17.
Is there a high point, do you think, of those early days? I mean, obviously a lot of high points that you've talked about.
The high point was the early Plant Bar days before House of Jealous Lovers came out, when everybody believed in everybody else. And I saw James every day and we would argue about music and we just loved each other so much. And, when the high point is always, like, I'll give you this analogy, like as a songwriter, the best time is always when you first write a song and you just listen to it over and over again, like you record it and just listen to it a bunch. That's where meditation tunnel came from. The concept of meditation tunnel is just making loops of stuff that you could listen to indefinitely and it doesn't get boring. And you just feel like euphoric and you feel like you're in a meditation tunnel. So like the early days of DFA felt like a meditation tunnel in the sense that we knew we were right. Like we knew without a shadow of a doubt that we had something really special and no one else knew yet. And that is always the best feeling when it's kind of private, It's like when you first, just that first rush of being in love when you didn't think it was possible, and then all of a sudden the entire world opens up and swallows you and you just are just like blissed out, like that moment, like probably recording House of Jealous Lovers for the first time and just being like actually hearing it back through the speakers and being like, whoa, like that's pretty cool, dude. Like, or some of the other songs like Killing, or like this songs, those first songs where we really had something on tape and we didn't play it for anybody yet. And it was just like, yeah, that moment of creation. I guess that's probably how God feels, like if you follow a certain kind of biblical, like, on the first day, God created, the ocean or whatever. Like, that's probably how God felt when he created the ocean, or whatever. It's just like, that's cool. That, like, that didn't exist a minute ago and now it exists and it feels really good.
Is there anything you do differently about, I don't know, any of your time in the Rapture, really?
I love that. I love that question. I think if you like yourself, I think you're really ultimately asking me if I like myself. And why I say that is because anyone who says that they would have done something differently means that they're not satisfied, right? It's kind of like if you're happy on your birthday. If you're happy on your birthday, it means that you're okay with the choices you made and that there isn't anything you feel like you should have done. And if you're not happy, it means that you're just not free, and maybe you'll never be free. I mean, I think that there's a grief thing to do. I think I've done enough grieving of the Rapture. I think if you had asked me that 8 years ago, I might have given you a very long list, but I feel like I've done a lot of grieving, particularly around my relationship with Vito and to an extent, James Murphy and like other people where I'm like, yeah, I mean, there was fucked up stuff. And, you know, I would love to change somebody else's life who is in the same position that I was in the Rapture, but I wouldn't change the Rapture.
Is there a song or album that makes you most nostalgic about that period? Be one of your own if you want.
No, it's not my own. I mean, I used to work when I was working at Plant Bar. I used to get made fun of by the bar manager, who was this Irish guy named Neil, spelled Niall. And Neil, who I didn't understand for the first year because his accent was so insane and he was drunk most of the time, but I loved him. I would only listen to Ziggy Stardust and Screamadelica on repeat. They had one of those like 5 CD changers in the DJ booth. And I would just put those on. And for the first like 5 hours of any bar shift, like no one comes in, like you go in at before dark, you know, at 6 o'clock, you set stuff up and whatever. And then, it's kind of like, yeah, I just listened to those records on repeat when no one was there for 5 hours every day. Every bar shift I had probably worked like 3 days a week or something, you know? But yeah, I mean, it's hard to, I kind of have this idea of like a perfect record, you know, and there's many like perfect records, but yeah, I mean, sort of Ziggy Stardust and Screamadelica. Also, you can kind of just trace back to being British, like, you know, there's books and TV shows about this. Like there's a really good BBC documentary about Ziggy Stardust, but it's kind of like ground zero for everything that comes after that, isn't it? You know, it's kind of like every important, have you seen that documentary actually?
Yeah, I think so, yeah.
It's like, you know, it basically birthed like anything British after Ziggy Stardust is directly related to Ziggy Stardust.
Yeah, I mean, everyone talks about that moment on Top of the Pops where, is it Starman? Because it just kind of changed everything.
Yeah, and just, you know, like I think for me that's the blueprint of like my fantasy version of being English, which is the same exact fantasy version that every English person has.
Yeah.
So it's universal. It's the universal gateway to being English.
And then obviously you've carried on making music. Like, how is that process different, and how do you anticipate the challenges for new bands now, do you think?
Those are two really good questions. Very different, I think. So first, process-wise, like Meditation Tunnel was, like I said, just listening to loops of stuff and learning how to sample records, like particularly sample myself. Like that was a big breakthrough for me, producing music. But really just a meditation and figuring out, I used to get horrible stomach aches when I made music. Like I would just, because I was so competitive that I would just, like sometimes when I go play softball, I get a stomach ache because like the game is close, or like I just have this part of me that's so competitive that it hurts it hurts me, you know? And it also creates things. So it's sort of a weird thing to navigate, but I think it's so much different because the process is getting less painful over time. That's the main thing. And then what was the other question you asked? Something about new bands or like new artists or something?
Yeah, sorry, it's a bit of a different question, really. Just wonder how you see it for new bands now. Like, say, the Rapture was starting out now. How do you anticipate it would be different for you guys? Like, what would the challenges be, do you think?
Well, there's a really interesting chart of, I don't know if you've seen this thing, but it's like, I just do tons and tons of research. That's kind of like the definitive thing for me. But like, if you look at the charts, like the world top 10 of the last 50 years, in the last like 10 or 20 years, like there hasn't been a band in the top 10. Did you know that?
Really? I didn't know that.
So according to the world, bands don't exist. And according to indie rock, like if you follow, you know, Pitchfork or whatever media, right? Like it's not like bands don't exist either. It's really, indie rock is now Angel Olsen, or like somebody, like individual people who may have bands. And also Ableton, the computer, like Harris from the Rapture, bass player, like has this funny theory where he says, the computer is the Apple laptop is the new Stratocaster, and like, that essentially, and I think he's right. It's kind of like Ableton, like the path of like a new band. Like I would have never started a band because I would have just used my computer to record everything, play the bass, learn how to program drums or play drums myself. And, after I had made the record that I wanted to make, then I would have had other people play it with me. But that isn't a band. Like, that's not, like, the Rapture is like, we write songs, either like I write a song and I bring it in, or like we just get in a room and like play. And that's how CD Films writes songs, right? It's like, we just get in a room and play, and then like, then write some lyrics to that or whatever, like try to fit that into a song. But that's not, like, who has the money to have a practice space, or who in the modern Instagram era is like, all kids are just trying to figure out what to put on their Instagram, which has nothing to do with like renting a rehearsal space. Like, how does that fit into Instagram, or how does that fit into social media in any way? Like, it's just like, but at the same time, I don't know. I mean, like, I get messages from kids and bands, and I talk to them about stuff, and it seems like bands are happening, like, but it's very like arcane. Like, you can't be in the top 10 if you're a band. Like, it doesn't happen anymore. Like, and or getting attention or whatever. I don't know. I mean, the Rapture is such a product of its time. Like, we were really about the information age turning around. Like, a lot of people say Pieces of the People We Love is the last record that they bought on CD ever, like, and that's really interesting, right? Because the Rapture, music is a utility now. It's not, it's like water. Like, people are paid completely differently. Like, people are paid in attention. Like, they're not paid in money. Like, artists are complaining a lot these days about, Spotify is killing everything and stuff like that. But what they're really upset about, whether they know it or not, is getting less attention. Like, because the attention is split into so many micro things and controlled by computers, predictive computers that are making money for corporations. Like, there's a computer that's predicting what you will like, and it's controlling us and making money. And so, like, in the context of that, I mean, I don't know, man. Like, we're like light years away from 2000, or the Rapture started in 97, 98. So like, it's inconceivable. Like, when I talk to my kid who's 14 about what I was doing in 1997, like, he just laughs, he's just like, what? It's like, you were doing okay. Like, it just can't even conceive. He can't even conceive of not being controlled by a computer 24/7.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't
it? It's fucking awesome, man. I'm stoked on it. I'm not like someone was trying to talk me into being really afraid today. Like, I'm not afraid, like, and I'm like enjoying the pandemic. Like, it's been the best 6 months of my life. And I know people are suffering, but it's like, I'm just not fighting reality. Like, the reality is that's the reality. And like, I accept, like, whether I like it or not is kind of irrelevant. It's like, I just need to fucking deal with it and use the tools the best way that I can. Like, not that I'm condoning large corporations or computer algorithms that control data usage. Like, I'm not saying like that's cool or that I'm advocating for that. I'm just saying, like, we're like firmly in that reality. And if no matter how hard you struggle for at least like the next 6 months, like, you're still going to be in that reality. So now what?
We always try and finish on a funny story about the Gallagher brothers, if possible, or a funny story about, one of the big rock and roll names from that, from any time, really.
When I was part of the whole NME universe, the Gallagher brothers were just like, they're around all the time, but the people that were interested in me was like Damon Albarn and Jarvis Cocker, which is part of the Holy Trinity, right? Like, if you watch any like Brit pop documentaries and stuff,
yeah,
great ones. But Yeah, it was like the Gallagher brothers weren't very interested in me. Like Kasabian was really interested in me because they were kind of like into dance music ish, you know, but like, and the Gallagher brothers were like really into them, but like, you know, it was like the Gallagher brothers could really give a shit about the Rapture. You know, I mean, we were around each other all the time at like the NME Awards or whatever, and they're always like, you know, wearing parkas. It's funny that the thing I didn't understand as an American was just how fucking funny they are. Like they're really, really funny. Like, and they know they're funny. And I almost think of them as like comedians more than like a band, you know? Like I'm a fan of, I like What's the Story, Morning Glory, you know, it's like, or I mean, it's a really good record and really good songwriting, but I think their biggest contribution to culture is just that they're fucking hilarious. Like they're really funny. And like, it's kind of sad their whole war with Blur and Damon Albarn and stuff, because Damon's like, he's such like a sensitive guy, you know, and he's very, and they just kind of beat the shit out of him in a kind of way that's like, almost you don't want to laugh because it's really thuggish. And it kind of like, they're just like high school bullies with parkas and like Beatles haircuts, but like, they're kind of like, I don't know, like it just taps into some sort of male dominance kind of Lord of the Flies thing that, and the fact that they're so kind of self-aware, and then one of them's like legitimately mental, you know, and then the other one is, I mean, also like they're just, you know, kind of like dysfunctional family on stage. It's a lot like my family. It's kind of like my mom was like brutally funny, like really funny, and you couldn't always understand if she was making fun of you or not. And that's kind of the feeling that you get with it, which is a very British thing. But, you know, I don't know. Like I'm at once like terrified of them and fascinated by them. It's like sharks, like, you know, it's like Shark Week. It's like, it's really cool and it's powerful and it's exciting, but it's also, they're also kind of terrifying in a way too. The Gallagher brothers.
Yeah.
It's like you wouldn't want to cross them. Like, you know, like there's a lot of stories of them, you know, trying to like fight people or fight each. I mean, they're willing to fight anyone who's willing to fight each other. It's like, I'm probably just going to steer clear of that.